The First Battle of Geonosis was one of the most important battles in galactic history, the beginning of the Clone Wars and the end of 1,000 years of peace. Most Star Wars fans are familiar with this important battle, but most of the time, it's the surface theaters that receive the most focus. But while the ground battle was certainly the most important part of the conflict, there was a space battle above Geonosis as well, and it played a bigger role in the course of the Clone Wars than you might think. In this video, we'll be explaining why. Just prior to the outbreak of the Battle of Geonosis, the corporate factions that were about to form the Separatist Council grounded a significant portion of their fleets at landing sites around the Imga Hills, where they picked up vast shipments of battle droids from the Geonosian factories. On Geonosis, the members of the Separatist Council officially pooled their private forces to create the CIS droid army, and this grounded fleet was intended to spirit the vanguard of this new army to key mustering grounds all over the galaxy. During the battle itself, the Republic's main objective was to prevent the droid army from escaping Geonosis, and to do so, they threw everything at these landing zones. This involved not only a ground assault, but also a space battle, as the Republic's own fleet was tasked with shooting down any transports that escaped the planet. At the start of the battle, the Confederacy had 286 Hard Cell class transports, 41 Diamond class cruisers, and 60 Lucrehulk class core ships grounded on Geonosis. But it also had a number of other ships in orbit. Many of the core ships had detached from larger Lucrehulk class battleships and left their ring sections in orbit, while a number of Lucrehulk class battleships were stationed above Geonosis at full strength for planetary defense. With them were a selection of Lupus-class missile frigates and a few Separatist cruisers of unknown classification, which appear to have been Geonosian in origin. The Trade Federation battleships each carried 1,500 Vulture droids, while the Geonosians had thousands of their own Nantex-class territorial defense fighters, most of which were on standby at ground-based hangars. In addition, the Geonosians had a number of anti-orbital cannons stationed on the planet's surface for defense against capital ships, with 3 covering the Republic's intended assault vector. The Republic, meanwhile, came to Geonosis with a fleet of 20 acclimated class assault ships, including the Archon, the Majestic, the Prosecutor, and the Implacable. At the height of the battle, 12 of these ships landed on Geonosis, while the remaining 8 remained in orbit to participate in the naval battle. Stock acclimated class assault ships lacked starfighter hangars, but some of those that fought at Geonosis were apparently modified to act as starfighter carriers, as the Republic also deployed prototype V-19 Torrent starfighters, LAAT gunships, and Delta 7 starfighters. Most of the latter were piloted by Jedi aces, most notably Adi Gallia. As you all know, the Battle of Geonosis began with Mace Windu's assault on the Geonosian arena, in which 212 Jedi participated and only about 24 survived. These Jedi all came to Geonosis in their own personal Delta 7 starfighters, which allowed them to evade the Separatists' orbital blockade. However, the Jedi did start taking fire from the Geonosians' anti-orbital cannons, so before beginning the assault on the arena, Windu and Luminara Unduli set out to destroy the cannons first, clearing the Republic's intended assault vector and eliminating the Geonosians' primary defense against incoming capital ships. With the anti-orbital guns destroyed, most of the Jedi landed outside the arena and began the battle there. While the arena battle kept Separatist leadership distracted, the main Republic fleet made its move, jumping into orbit around Geonosis and beginning its descent. A few Jedi remained in their fighters to provide cover, most notably Adi Gallia, Siritachi, Ashrad Het, Bant Irin, and Anya Kuro. 8 of the assault ships deployed additional fighters and engaged the Separatist fleet, which was not prepared for the Republic assault. Thanks to the element of surprise, the Republic fleet was initially able to scatter the Separatist defense fleet and cut off all communications between them and the surface, allowing the rest of the assault ships to maintain the element of surprise. Led by the Archon, the 12 assault ships descended to Geonosis' surface, escorted by Gallia and the other Jedi. With the anti-orbital cannons destroyed, they faced minimal resistance. They passed through Geonosis' rings on their way to the surface, using the rings as cover from the Separatist fleet. The assault ships only faced resistance from a handful of Lupus-class frigates and Separatist fighters, a mix of Vulture droids and Geonosian fighters that had been launched from the ground, which Adi Gallia and Siritachi easily eliminated. Once they were through the rings, the assault ships descended into the Geonosian atmosphere. On their way down, they bombarded the Geonosian hangars, destroying the vast majority of their starfighters before they could even launch. Only a handful of Nantex-class starfighters remained after this bombardment, giving the Republic air superiority for the ground battle and allowing the assault ships to land with minimal resistance. Once they landed, they deployed troops to begin the assault on the grounded troop transports. Meanwhile, in orbit, Adi Gallia took command of Republic naval forces, and she and the other Jedi Aces rejoined the ongoing space battle. They and the Republic assault ships in orbit did enough damage to the Trade Federation's orbiting fleet that the bulk of Republic space forces were able to turn their attention to shooting down the fleeing troop transports, which began lifting off as soon as the Republic ground assault began. But this was complicated by the sudden arrival of new participants in the space battle. Just before the Battle of Geonosis, Adi Gallia had been working with Nim, the captain of the Lock Revenants, a pirate gang based in the Carthax system. She had allied with the pirates against the Trade Federation, which was illegally pillaging the system, oppressing its native populations, and using the system's resources to manufacture trihexylon, a highly illegal and exceptionally dangerous chemical weapon. During her campaign against Federation forces, Gallia also went up against Sabaoth Squadron, a mercenary fleet commanded by Captain Kavik Toth. Together, Gallia and Nim all but drove the Trade Federation out of the system before Gallia was recalled to Geonosis. She left trusting the Lock Revenants to mop up Sabaoth Squadron and what was left of the Trade Federation presence, but during the Battle of Geonosis, she received a message from Nim. Sabaoth Squadron had abandoned the fight and was en route to Geonosis with bombers loaded with trihexylon. Kavik Toth, as it turned out, was in league with Count Dooku, and the Count had summoned him to Geonosis to level the battlefield with trihexylon bombs, which he hoped would kill Yoda and the other Jedi leading the Republic forces there. His forces arrived in orbit above Geonosis in stages, beginning with the trihexylon deployment forces, consisting of 12 hex bombers and 8 hex deployers, the latter being larger missile frigates packed with trihexylon. Adi Gallia and a squadron of Jedi starfighters was able to destroy these craft before they could begin their assault, but the vanguard of Sabaoth Squadron soon followed. A pair of Sabaoth destroyers packed with starfighter squadrons. The Jedi were outmatched, but help was on the way. Nim himself arrived to join the fight, taking to the skies in his personal bomber, together with 3 wingmen and a pair of mare cruisers, led from the flagship Tritus. With the help of the Lock Revenants, the Jedi were able to take out one of the Sabaoth destroyers, only for another to join the fight. Kavik Toth's flagship, the Reaver. The battle was fierce, but ultimately both Sabaoth destroyers were eliminated. Kavik Toth fled the doomed Reaver aboard his personal starfighter, but he was shot down by Adi Gallia, ending the threat of Sabaoth Squadron. Unfortunately, Sabaoth Squadron had distracted the Jedi enough to allow the bulk of the Separatist troop transports to escape Geonosis. A little over half of the hard cell class transports stationed on Geonosis escaped, 169 out of 286, while the Separatists only lost 5 Diamond class cruisers and 14 core ships. The rest escaped with their payloads of battle droids, and they and the remainder of the Separatist fleet fled Geonosis, leaving the Republic victorious, if unsuccessful, in their primary objective. When we think of impactful Star Wars battles, we tend to think of the big ones. Battles in which thousands of ships and millions of soldiers are thrown into the fray. But sometimes, smaller battles can have an outsized effect on the course of an entire war, as was the case for the battle we'll be discussing today. The Battle of Kaliida Nebula only involved a few vessels and starfighter squadrons, but it had dramatic consequences for the Clone Wars as a whole. It may well have saved the Republic Navy, and in this video we'll be explaining how. Early in the Clone Wars, the CIS Navy had a considerable advantage over the Republic Navy, and as of late 22 BBY, it had developed a trump card. At nearly 5 kilometers in length, the subjugated class dreadnought Malevolence was one of the largest warships ever deployed, and it boasted a superweapon that the Republic Navy had no answer to. A gigantic set of iron pulse cannons that could disable entire fleets in a single pulse.
Apart from these fleet-killing doomsday weapons, the Malevolence was covered with hundreds of turbolaser batteries and had hangars packed with vulture droids and battle droids, allowing the vessel to practically stage planetary invasions single-handedly. The Malevolence was the flagship of the CIS Navy, and it lived up to both its own name and the name of its class. Under the command of General Grievous, the Malevolence went on a rampage across the southern theater of the galaxy. At first, the nature of the Malevolence was unknown to Republic Strategic Command. It had left no survivors at Fu and the other sites of its first battles, only debris fields that had once been entire Republic fleets. At Abrogado, however, Plo Koon and a handful of clones survived the destruction of their fleet to report the Malevolence's capabilities to the Republic, and the Separatists' mystery weapon was a mystery no longer. But the truth about the Malevolence was nearly as terrifying as the mystery of it had been. And without having to worry about discovery, Grievous began using the ship against higher profile targets. At Vanek Iktor, Von Dark and Rendelia, the Malevolence destroyed Republic fleet after Republic fleet, and there was nothing that could be done to stop it. If Grievous continued at this pace, he could wipe out the entire Republic Navy in a matter of months. The Malevolence had to be destroyed if the Republic stood a chance, but this was easier said than done. The Malevolence's ion pulse cannons could disable even Star Destroyers in seconds, leaving them defenseless against its turbolaser batteries. There wasn't a warship in the Republic arsenal that was fast enough to avoid getting caught in the blast, and even if the Malevolence somehow missed with the ion cannon, it had enough turbolasers to shred a fleet of Republic warships anyway. The only hope of avoiding the ion cannon was with a starfighter assault, but any force of fighters would still have the turbolasers to reckon with, plus the Malevolence's fighter squadrons. Despite the odds, however, Anakin Skywalker was determined to attempt just such a starfighter assault. He had a squadron of veteran clone pilots and a dozen new BTLB Y-Wing bombers, and he believed that if he could catch the Malevolence by surprise, he could eliminate the Dreadnought and General Grievous in one fell swoop. The trick was getting the jump on Grievous. But after the Battle of Rendelia, he and Admiral Yularen were able to deduce his likely next target. At Rendelia, Grievous had targeted a fleet of medical transports, and Rendelia was close to the Kaliida Shoals Medical Center, one of the 20 Haven-class medical stations servicing the Grand Army of the Republic. Kaliida Shoals was one of the Republic's most active medical stations, treating over 60,000 wounded clones, and if it was destroyed, an entire sector army would be left without sufficient medical support. Such a strike would be devastating for Republic forces, and Skywalker and Yularen figured that this would be what Grievous attempted next. They were correct. After mopping up at Rendelia, the Malevolence headed over to the Kaliida Shoals system. To get there, however, it had to navigate around the Kaliida Nebula. Skywalker, on the other hand, planned to lead a strike force straight through the nebula to get Kaliida Shoals first. Skywalker's attack force was tiny, consisting of just 12 Y-Wings manned by himself, his Padawan Ahsoka, and the men of the Shadow Squadron, plus Plo Koon, who tagged along in his Delta 7B starfighter. The plan was that they would disable the Malevolence, allowing a fleet of Star Destroyers to come in and finish it off. To beat Grievous to Kaliida Shoals, Skywalker's team used an old smuggler's route called the Balmorra Run, an odd name seeing as Kaliida Shoals was on the edge of the Mid-Rim, and Balmorra was located half a galaxy away in the colonies. This ended up being a questionable choice of routes, however, as the route passed through the nesting grounds of a colony of Nebrae mantas, which damaged 2 of the Y-Wings as they passed through. Despite these complications, Shadow Squadron made it to Kaliida Shoals before Grievous did. The medical station was already evacuating, but many of its patients were immobile, so the station itself was still a target. When the Malevolence arrived in system, it targeted the fleeing evacuation craft first, disabling several medical frigates before destroying them. As soon as the Malevolence appeared, Shadow Squadron made their move, and Grievous sent out squadrons of vulture droids to destroy them while the ion cannon prepared for another shot. While Shadow Squadron was distracted by the droids, the Malevolence fired an ion pulse at the starfighters. Skywalker ordered his pilots to push their fighters to the limit to outmaneuver the field, This caused a catastrophic malfunction on Shadow 2's Y-Wing, causing it to crash into Shadow 5's. Both craft were destroyed and their pilots were lost, while Shadow 6, Shadow 7, and Shadow 10 were caught in the ion pulse. With Shadow Squadron at half strength, Grievous prepared to fire on the medical center. Skywalker refused to give up, however, and led his remaining pilots in an attack run toward the Malevolence's bridge. This led right through the thick of the warship's turbo laser batteries, however, making such an attack suicidal at best. Shadow Squadron lost one more Y-Wing before, at the urging of his Padawan, Skywalker switched targets. What was left of Shadow Squadron diverted course and instead attacked the portside ion cannon, pummeling it with proton torpedoes as it charged up to fire on the next station. When the cannon tried to fire, it exploded, causing catastrophic damage to the Malevolence. Skywalker's attack had been a success, though he had lost half of his men in making it. It wasn't long before General Kenobi, Admiral Yularen, and a trio of Venator-class Star Destroyers arrived on scene as planned. They immediately opened fire on the Malevolence, and Grievous was forced to order the ship to flee. But the warship's hyperdrive had been disabled, preventing it from getting very far. It could only flee at sublight speeds, while the Republic fleet pursued, saturating it with turbo laser fire. The battle had moved from the Kaliida Shoals Medical Center to a nearby moon, which is usually identified as the dead moon of Antar. There's just one small problem with that. Antar was located in the inner rim and was absolutely nowhere near Kaliida Shoals, and since the Malevolence didn't have a functional hyperdrive, it would have taken over 30,000 years for it to get all the way to the dead moon, and that's assuming that it's moving at near light speed. Put bluntly, this is nonsensical, especially since there was separatist space much closer to Kaliida Shoals than Antar. But why did destroying the Malevolence's ion cannons take out the hyperdrive at all, you might ask? Well, that's because the Malevolence's ion cannons were more than just weapons. The whole vessel had been designed around an experimental reactor system that recaptured waste heat for added efficiency, which required regular, large-scale energy venting to remain stable. This design was impractical in most applications, but the Malevolence found a use for the reactor, channeling its regular ventings into the ion pulse cannons. As a result, when the cannons were destroyed, it caused a catastrophic chain reaction across the ship's power grid, knocking out the hyperdrive and a bunch of other systems. This left the Malevolence a sitting, well, limping duck after Skywalker's attack, but it was still far from destroyed. Even though it had suffered severe damage, the ship was so enormous that it was able to just soak up all the fire the Republic fleet could throw at it. Thus, Grievous's escape plan was simple. They would just keep running, get the hyperdrive back online, and jump away for more extensive repairs. To buy Grievous some time, Darth Sidious arranged for Senator Amidala of Naboo to stumble into the system and be captured by the Malevolence, giving Grievous a hostage to buy some time with. What Grievous didn't know is that Senator Amidala was Anakin Skywalker's wife, and there was no way in hell he would let her remain in Separatist custody for long. Skywalker and Kenobi boarded the Malevolence using Skywalker's freighter, the Twilight, rescued Amidala, and then, since they were already aboard, they set out to sabotage the ship to prevent it from escaping. Grievous chased the intruders all over the ship, preventing Kenobi from sabotaging the hyperdrive, but Skywalker and Amidala were able to slip past him and storm the bridge, where Skywalker rewired the ship's Navi computer. The Jedi and Senator then fled the Malevolence, with Grievous in close pursuit aboard his starfighter. Meanwhile, the Malevolence's crew managed to repair the hyperdrive and set a course to Separatist space. However, Skywalker's rewiring caused the ship to turn toward the nearby moon instead, which it promptly flew into at light speed. This obliterated the Malevolence and presumably left quite the crater on the moon, ending the Battle of Kaliida Shoals in the Republic's favor. Grievous, the sole survivor on the Separatist side, fled the system, while the Jedi returned to their fleet to celebrate. The Republic Navy would live to fight another day. The Battle of Christophsis was the first battle we got to see in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, and over the course of the show's first few seasons, it was revisited several times. This can make piecing together the full chronology of the battle somewhat difficult. Even if you watch the appropriate episodes in chronological order, they don't quite lead into each other, and there's parts of the battle that happen mostly off-screen that can be easily forgotten. In this video, we're going to be analysing the naval aspect of this early war battle, a crucial theatre that's too often overlooked. Late in 22 BBY, as Separatist forces pushed rimward down the Corellian run, they decided to occupy the neutral planet of Christophsis, a strategically important world on the run that acted as a gateway between the mid and outer rims. Long term, the Confederacy hoped to cut Republic forces moving down the run off the outer rim, and they sought to use Christophsis as a staging ground for assaults on Kamino and Rothana, two of the Grand Army of the Republic's most crucial fortress worlds. In the short term, the Confederacy wanted Christophsis' abundant mineral resources, especially its vast deposits of crystals, and capturing the planet would also give them a chance at capturing or killing Republic Senator Bail Organa, who ran a refugee camp in the planet's capital city. The Confederacy, recognizing the many strategic benefits of taking Christophsis, invested heavily in taking and keeping the planet. Two of the Confederacy's greatest commanders, Admiral Trench of the CIS Navy and General Warm Loathsome of the Retail Caucus, were assigned to capture the planet, and they brought massive fleets and armies for the job. Trench struck first, leading a fleet of over 30 capital ships in establishing a blockade of Christophsis, following which Loathsome landed his droid armies, a massive force composed of innumerable battle droids and tanks. It didn't take long for Loathsome's forces to occupy most of the planet. A few pockets of resistance endured. Some of the Christophsians resisted, and a few small detachments of clone troopers from the 13th Sector Army fought tooth and nail to defend Senator Organa, who was trapped on the planet by Trench's blockade. With such a well-respected Republic senator trapped on Christophsis, Trench and Loathsome knew it would only be a matter of time before the Republic struck back and attempted to take the planet, or at least rescue Senator Organa. As Loathsome fortified his positions on the surface, Admiral Trench arrayed his ships in standard blockade formation above the city Caledonia, the Republic's likely attack vector. Then, all he had to do was wait, but not for very long. It didn't take more than a few days for the Republic to attempt its first assault on the Christophsis blockade. The fleet Trench had in position above Christophsis was nothing to scoff at. The Admiral himself personally commanded the blockade from the Providence-class dreadnought Invincible, which was supported by at least 12 Lucrehulk-class battleships, at least one Recusant-class light destroyer, and at least 19 Munificent-class star frigates, at least 33 capital ships in all. This was a fleet with incredible firepower. Trench's blockade formation allowed the Invincible and those Munificents to make the most of their powerful forward guns, and all those Lucrehulk battleships were armed to the teeth. The sheer number of Lucrehulk battleships, which was considerably more than the Confederacy mustered for most Clone Wars naval battles, also meant that Trench's fleet had an absurd number of starfighters to support it. At minimum, this fleet had over 18,000 Vulture droids to throw into the fray, and that's assuming that only the battleships were carrying starfighters. Trench's flagship also had a squadron or two of the Confederacy's brand new Hyena-class bombers. To break this massive blockade, the newly promoted General Anakin Skywalker brought, in total, 3 Venator-class star destroyers and 3 Pelter-class frigates. Skywalker had the support of Admiral Yularen, who commanded the fleet from the bridge of the Resolute, but he was still hilariously outmatched. This went about as well as you might expect. Skywalker didn't get completely wiped off the map, since most of the blockade held its position and let the Invincible do the heavy lifting, but he still lost a frigate and suffered critical damage to one of his star destroyers before being forced to retreat behind Christophsis' moon. There, his fleet was joined by a 4th star destroyer, the Negotiator, the flagship of General Obi-Wan Kenobi. Kenobi, fortunately for the Christophsians, had a better plan than Skywalker, much to the surprise of no one at all. He had brought along a state-of-the-art IPV-2C stealth corvette, which he hoped could run Trench's blockade and deliver supplies to Senator Organa, buying the Republic Navy more time to clean house in orbit. Skywalker and Admiral Yularen took command of the stealth ship for this mission, but as they slipped through the blockade, Trench got tired of waiting for the Republic to launch another attack, and he dispatched his Hyena bombers to increase pressure on Senator Organa's command center.
The bombers brought Organa's forces to the brink of collapse, and with time running short, Kenobi rallied what remained of the Republic fleet, planning to attack the blockade again while the stealth ship continued with its mercy mission. But Skywalker advocated against this plan of attack, as Kenobi's offense would never succeed against the sheer firepower of Trench's fleet. Instead, Skywalker used the stealth ship to engage the Invincible directly, playing a game of cat and mouse with Trench that he hoped would distract the Separatists from the fight on the surface. Ultimately, Skywalker was able to lead Trench's own tracking torpedoes into the Invincible's bridge while the warship shields were down, causing a chain reaction that crippled the ship and seemingly killed Admiral Trench. The sudden loss of the Invincible threw the Separatist blockade into disarray, giving the Republic fleet an opening to attack. From the bridge of the Negotiator, Kenobi was able to punch a hole in the blockade and land armies of clone troopers on Caledonia. He and Skywalker helped Senator Organa and his remaining troops escape and then took command of the ground battle, while Admiral Yularen took command of Republic naval forces, which soon received some much needed reinforcements. But the battle over Christophsis didn't end there. The Invincible, which had proven very vincible indeed, was out of commission, but the other 30-odd ships in Trench's fleet were still intact, and once their commanders established a new chain of command, the true space battle began. Fortunately for Admiral Yularen, more Republic ships were on the way. The core of the Republic fleet swelled from 4 Venator-class Star Destroyers to at least 7, including the flagship Resolutes and the Star Destroyers Negotiator and Dauntless. At least 4 Acclimated-class assault ships also joined the fight, and the remaining 2 Pelter-class frigates were joined by a slew of other support ships, including a supply vessel named the Hunter. To deal with the Separatist fleet's vast swarms of Vulture droids, the Republic deployed thousands of V-19 Torrent starfighters and Delta 7B light interceptors. Republic naval forces were still outnumbered, but the odds had been evened a little. With the assistance of a Jedi Knight, Republic bombers were able to take out the Separatists' Recusant-class destroyer and one of its Lucrehulk battleships, giving Yularen's fleet a vital opening that allowed the Admiral to eliminate several of the Separatists' cruisers. From then on, the battle was more of an even fight, but it rapidly descended into total chaos, with what had once been an orderly blockade losing all sense of cohesion. The scene above Christophsis became reminiscent of one that would take shape above Coruscant 2.5 years later. Capital ships scattered every which way, firing on each other with little organization or cohesion, as vast swarms of starfighters filled the space between. The disorder was made worse by sudden fluctuations in Christophsis' sun, which caused intermittent communications blackouts. Both sides suffered heavy casualties in the ensuing days-long naval battle. Yularen lost many of his ships, but he took out quite a few of the Confederacies as well, and starfighters on both sides were destroyed in the thousands. Toward the end of the naval battle, as the tide shifted back and forth on the planet's surface, Yularen lost a good chunk of his support fleet, interrupting the flow of supplies and reinforcements to the Republic's ground armies. From there, the situation only worsened, and the naval battle might have been lost entirely were it not for the sudden arrival of reinforcements. Grandmaster Yoda arrived at the 11th hour with additional Star Destroyers and assault ships, which rapidly turned the tide and forced what was left of Trench's fleet to abandon Christophsis. By that time, the battle on the surface had mostly been won. General Loathsome had been captured, and with the landing of Yoda's reinforcements, what was left of his army was crushed. The Republic had won. We talk about battles a lot on this channel, generally large ones like Geonosis or Coruscant, which involved millions of combatants and had a major effect on the course of the Clone Wars. But not every decisive battle is as big as those two. Beyond that, not every battle is won through overwhelming might. In some cases, superior support in a specific theater may be all it takes to turn the tide. Both of these are the case in the Battle of Teth, the battle we'll be looking at today. Teth, despite being a very small battle by Clone Wars standards, changed the course of the whole war, and though most of what we see of it focused on the ground battle, it was actually the nuances of its naval theater
that had the most impact. In this video, we'll be analysing the battle in detail, focusing on its naval theatre. Teth was a fairly obscure world, located on the treeless trade route in a region that, during the Clone Wars, was considered wild space. It was part of a set of sectors rimward of Hutt space that weren't officially Hutt territory, but were, in practice, much like Tatooine. Teth was a colourful jungle world, home to Hutt vacation homes, a few minor settlements, and a whole lot of wilderness. In ordinary circumstances, a battle likely would never have been fought there, at least not during the Clone Wars. But all that changed when Rotta, the son of Jabba the Hutt, was kidnapped and brought to an abandoned Bomar monastery on the planet. The Hutts were furious over this kidnapping, but the mercenaries they sent to retrieve Rotta were killed, and Jabba, in desperation, ultimately turned to the Republic for aid, promising that the Hutts would grant Republic forces passage along Hutt-controlled trade routes if they ensured Rotta's safe return. This was a big deal. Hutt space was huge and shared a long border with one of the biggest enclaves of Separatist space, and access to the Hutt's trade routes would allow the Republic to force the Separatists into a two-front war in several key sectors. Thus, the Republic agreed to help Jabba. Republic intelligence suggested that the CIS was behind the kidnapping, and, spoiler alert, they were, but the Separatists sent their own messengers to Jabba, and they cast blame on the Jedi instead. Both Obi-Wan Kenobi and Count Dooku made their case to Jabba personally on Tatooine, and Jabba ultimately decided to grant the strategic privileges the Hutts were promising to whoever gave him his son back. Thus, Republic forces were dispatched to Teth under the command of Jedi General Anakin Skywalker and his new Padawan, Ahsoka Tano. Skywalker seemingly didn't have all that much manpower to spare for the mission. He and his forces arrived in a single Acclamated-class assault ship which remained in orbit, apparently on standby. Skywalker and his men deployed to his surface in a squadron of LAAT gunships commanded by Lieutenant Hawk, with 4 or 5 gunships in total, alongside a pair of LAAT carriers. The carriers dropped off a pair of ATTE walkers, while the gunships deployed the men of Torrent Company, a detachment of the 501st Legion commanded by Captain Rex, about 144 clones in all. On the way down, the gunships took heavy fire from the monastery, which was located atop a large, near-vertical cliff. The Separatists had troops at the top, a battalion of B-1 and B-2 droids, a handful of droidekas and STAPs, and several DSD-1 dwarf spider droids, which acted as light artillery, firing flak at the gunships. The gunships were all able to land without incident, however, and the Republic sustained no casualties until they had landed in the jungle below the monastery. Using grappling hooks and the magnetic feet of the ATTEs, Skywalker and his men managed to quickly scale the cliff and secure the monastery, albeit at the cost of several clones and one of the walkers. They did so without support. Hawk and his gunships apparently returned to the assault ship in orbit after deploying the troops, and that assault ship made no further appearance during the battle, presumably waiting in orbit for a signal from the ground team. That signal never came, as CIS forces inside the monastery jammed Republic communications all throughout the battle. Believing Separatist forces on Teth to have been defeated, Skywalker, Tano, and R2-D2 ventured into the monastery complex, while Rex and Torrent Company remained behind to defend the entrance. As the Jedi ventured into the monastery, Separatists began jamming Republic comms, and reinforcements appeared in orbit above the planet. At least one Munificent-class star frigate, and possibly more, joined the party and drove off Skywalker's assault ship before landing reinforcements on the surface. The Munificent released several squadrons of Vulture droids and 2 C-9979 landing craft, which deployed an additional battalion of battle droids around the monastery. Torrent Company and their surviving ATTE did their best to defend the monastery, but the Separatists had air support and they didn't, which made all the difference. The Vulture droids disabled the AT-TE, while the ground troops, under the command of Asajj Ventress, massacred Torrent Company. Only Captain Rex and 5 other clones survived the onslaught and were taken prisoner. It's worth noting that in both assaults, Torrent Company was facing roughly the same number of battle droids. The dramatic difference in outcome was primarily due to Separatist air support. Though, by this point in the Clone Wars film, we haven't actually seen any of the space battle yet, it had already made a huge difference. Fortunately for the Republic, however, what was left of Torrent Company had space forces of their own incoming. After Ventress followed Skywalker and Tano into the monastery, Admiral Yularen and Obi-Wan Kenobi arrived at Teth with the Venator-class Star Destroyer, Spirit of the Republic, which moved to engage Ventress's Munificent-class Star Frigate. As it did, it deployed several squadrons of V-19 Torrent starfighters led by Kenobi from the cockpit of his own Delta 7B interceptor. Kenobi and his squadrons engaged the Confederacy's Vulture droids, drawing them away from the monastery, while the Spirit of the Republic opened fire on the Confederacy's capital ships. The Spirit of the Republic also deployed several LAAT gunships, some to extract what remained of Skywalker's expedition and others carrying ground reinforcements, Commander Cody, and a detachment of the 212th Attack Battalion. Having retrieved Rota, Skywalker and Tano called one of the gunships for evac, but it was shot down by a Vulture droid which landed and engaged the 2 Jedi directly. Unable to call for another ship, they ultimately decided to ride a cancel to an adjacent mesa where a freighter, the Twilight, was docked. Meanwhile, Kenobi and his pilots achieved the upper hand in the aerial battle before the Jedi General disengaged to help Cody and his men rescue the survivors of Torrent Company. Cody's gunships took out Ventress's landing craft, and then he and his men finished off the Confederacy's ground forces. Kenobi then set off into the monastery to find Asajj Ventress. Meanwhile, Skywalker and Tano stole the Twilight, which turned out to be a Separatist ship anyway, and used it to escape Ventress. They prepared to abandon the battle as they had Rota and needed to get into Tatooine as soon as possible. To this end, the Jedi waded into the space battle, hoping to rendezvous with the Spirit of the Republic, but they not only picked up several Vulture droids, but also came under fire from the Star Destroyer itself, which had scanned them as enemy craft. Skywalker was able to contact Admiral Yularen and correct the misunderstanding, but before the Twilight could dock, the Spirit of the Republic's hangars were bombed by Vulture droids and critically damaged, forcing the Jedi to take the Twilight all the way to Tatooine. There, after a few more shenanigans, they ultimately returned Rota to Jabba and won access to the Hutt's trade routes for the Republic. After the Twilight made its escape, Ventress abandoned the battle. Without her leadership and with overwhelming Republic air support, her surviving ground forces were destroyed. The remaining Vulture droids and the Munificent-class Star Frigate in orbit presumably either retreated or were destroyed as well, and the Republic was left victorious, despite severe damage to the Spirit of the Republic. Despite the valiant efforts of the clone troopers fighting on the ground, most of the credit for this victory belongs on the shoulders of the Republic's pilots and the crew of the Spirit of the Republic, who turned the tide of the battle during the final hour. Air support and the naval battle may have been a secondary concern in the film itself, but as we believe we've demonstrated today, they ended up making all the difference. The Clone Wars were fought all across the galaxy on countless worlds. A very lucky few systems managed to escape the conflict unscathed. Most saw battle at least once. Some saw battle many times, as was the case with Kamino. Being the location of the Kamino cloning facilities and thus the homeworld of the Grand Army of the Republic, Kamino was a tempting target for the CIS all throughout the war. With each attempt, however, the tactics were radically different, forcing the planet's defenders to adjust their reaction each time. In all cases, however, the battles of Kamino were desperate moments for the Republic, times when the Confederacy came close to snuffing out the GAR for good. We've discussed these battles in the past, but today we'll be focusing on their naval theaters and how the tactics on both sides evolved. The first Battle of Kamino took place a mere 2 months into the Clone Wars. This offensive was led by Pasul Argente, the magistrate of the Corporate Alliance, who had no military experience but was looking to amass political power by winning an important battle. Argente was assisted by Commander Mirai, a Mon Calamari war hero, ardent separatist, and expert in amphibious warfare. They attacked Kamino with at least one Lucrehulk-class battleship, which carried C-9979 landing craft for the ground assault, vulture droids for the inevitable starfighter battle, and amphibious fighters flown by Mirai's handpicked Mon Calamari pilots. It was a small attack force, but separatist intelligence indicated that it would be sufficient to capture Tipoca City. The separatist fleet arrived above Kamino to find the planet only lightly defended, with only one wing of Delta 7 Jedi starfighters and some LAAT gunships in orbit. The Jedi had some of their best pilots on station to defend Kamino, including Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Aayla Secura, Cossex, and Tu Choi, plus at least a dozen others. They focused on destroying the Separatists' landing craft and vulture droids while they descended to Kamino's surface, initially ignoring the Separatists' capital ships. The reason why became apparent when a Republic fleet joined the fight. The Republic had learned of the impending attack on Kamino in advance, and the Jedi's plan had been to lure the Separatists into a false sense of security and then attack their battleships from behind with the vanguard of their fleet. Sayu Tin led at least 2 acclimated-class assault ships in engaging Argente's fleet, throwing the Separatist offensive into chaos. Nonetheless, vulture droids were able to shoot down several of the Jedi pilots, and many of the Confederacy's landing craft made it to Tipoca City. The result was a fierce ground battle that the Republic came very close to losing. But thanks to the Jedi and the newly deployed ARC troopers, the defenders of Tipoca City were able to repulse the assault. Tin's fleet routed Argente's battleships, and Mirai, in a last-ditch attempt to turn the battle around, headed down to Kamino's surface in his personal starfighter, the Shark. He attempted to destroy Tipoca City by targeting its underwater main reactor, only to discover that there was no such reactor, and the plans of the city CIS intelligence had received were incorrect. As Argente sounded the order to retreat, Mirai destroyed the Jedi starfighter's hyperspace rings in a suicide run, a desperate but ultimately useless final attack. The first Battle of Kamino was a disaster for the Confederacy, deliberately so, as Dooku wanted to use the battle to knock Argente down a peg, and Darth Sidious wanted to use it to kill Commander Mirai. But the next offensive would be much better planned. Later, in 22 BBY, General Grievous and Asajj Ventress began planning another assault on Kamino. Ventress infiltrated Tipoca City to get more accurate intelligence, while Grievous attempted to covertly capture the Republic's outpost on the Rishi Moon to give his forces the element of surprise. The mission was aborted when a few surviving clones managed to destroy the Rishi Moon outpost and alerted the Republic to the impending attack, but Grievous and Ventress would try again in mid-21 BBY. This time, they spared no expense on their invasion force. Grievous came to Kamino with a sizable fleet, led from the General's personal flagship, Providence-class carrier/destroyer. The fleet also included 3 Lucrehulk-class battleships, 3 Rikusent-class light destroyers, and 10 Munificent-class star frigates. These capital ships were supported by thousands of vulture droids, plus the new Tri-Fighters and Hyena bombers. Yet again, the purpose of this fleet was to deliver an invasion force of tens of thousands of battle droids to Tipoca City. The Republic, for its part, was also not messing around. It had a fleet of 10 Venator-class Star Destroyers, commanded by Admiral Yularen from the Star Destroyer Resolute, plus an acclimated-class assault ship and 2 Architens-class light cruisers in low orbit over Kamino. This blockade was supported by thousands of starfighters, many more than the Republic usually fielded. These were predominantly V-19 Torrent starfighters, but the Republic also deployed ARC-170 starfighters, BTLB Y-Wing bombers, and Delta 7B Jedi starfighters during the battle. Several veteran Republic squadrons were present for the battle, including Shadow Squadron. Republic starfighter forces were led by Anakin Skywalker. Grievous began the battle with a full-on assault on the Republic blockade, appearing to be pursuing conventional attack strategies. The ferocity of the attack was unexpected, and the Republic was immediately put on the defensive. The two fleets tore into each other while their starfighter squadrons battled between, immediately incurring high casualties for both sides. Grievous sent out squadrons of hyena bombers to soften up the Republic Star Destroyers, but Skywalker and his pilots were able to prevent them from doing any serious damage, and the Republic responded with Y-wing bombing runs against the Separatist fleet, targeting Grievous's cruisers. Between fire from the Republic fleet and the bombing runs, several Munificent-class star frigates were destroyed or subjected to heavy damage. Admiral Yularen noted that Grievous seemed almost eager to sacrifice his cruisers, apparently to shield his flagship from Republic fire. Munificent after Munificent was destroyed, showering Kamino in debris each time, but this was all according to Grievous's plan. As Obi-Wan Kenobi discovered, the battle in orbit was a diversion. The Separatist offensive appeared to be a conventional assault, like the first Battle of Kamino had been, but it wasn't. Grievous was deliberately throwing his cruisers away because they had re-entry pods containing disassembled Trident-class assault ships affixed to their hulls. As debris from the naval battle plummeted into Kamino's oceans, aqua droids from Asajj Ventress's personal Trident craft reassembled the assault ships, each of which contained payloads of battle droids. When the craft were assembled, the assault ships leapt out of the sea and attacked Tipoca City, disgorging droid armies and catching the city's defenders off guard. Once the assault began, Grievous left the naval battle to his tactical droid aid, TV-94B, and joined his armies in Tipoca City. He led an assault on the clone army's barracks, hoping to slaughter as many of the Republic soldiers as he could, while Ventress attempted to steal Jango Fett's DNA samples. Republic forces scrambled to repulse the assault, led by several ARC troopers. Jedi Master Shaak Ti commanded the defense of the city, and she was soon joined by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, the latter of whom abandoned the starfighter battle to defend the city. Ultimately, the battle was decided by the fight on the ground, not the naval battle. Kenobi and the GAR managed to repulse Grievous's offensive, while Skywalker prevented Ventress from stealing Fett's DNA. Grievous and Ventress were forced to retreat back to orbit, where what remained of Grievous's fleet abandoned the flight. The Separatists suffered heavy casualties, many of them deliberate sacrifices of Munificent-class star frigates. The Republic also suffered heavy casualties for starfighters and ground troops, but it didn't seem to have lost a single capital ship. While both battles of Kamino were decided on the ground, the naval theaters played major roles in both battles as well. In Grievous and Ventress's assaults, the attack on Tipoca City hinged on casualties sustained in the naval battle, which was where the Confederacy seemed to have committed the bulk of their forces. What's more, even though the naval battle was a diversion, Grievous still had Republic naval forces on the back foot, and if the defenders of Kamino hadn't fought as hard in orbit as they did, the Confederacy could have taken the planet with a conventional assault. But the Republic's naval forces fought tooth and nail to defend Kamino, and because of that, the Grand Army of the Republic survived to keep fighting. The Battle of Ryloth was one of the largest and most important battles of the early Clone Wars, fought over the Twi'lek homeworld. For several months after the initial offensive, the planet was subjected to a brutal Techno-Union occupation before Republic broke the planet's blockade and, with the help from local resistance fighters, liberated the planet. We've discussed parts of the Battle of Ryloth in the past, but we've usually focused on the ground theaters. In this video, we'll be discussing the battle's naval theater, particularly what happened before and after the part of the naval battle we were shown in Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Ryloth, despite being pretty remote, became strategically valuable with the outbreak of the Clone Wars. This wasn't due to the planet's location, but rather because it was the headquarters of the 14th Sector Army, the Republic's Red Tails command. That wasn't why the Confederacy invaded Ryloth, however. The assault on Ryloth was spearheaded by the Techno-Union and was the brainchild of its foreman, Wat Tambor, who wanted to capture Ryloth for non-strategic reasons. Fellow Separatist Council member Pascal Argente had a ton of money and rare treasures stored away on Ryloth, and Tambor wanted to use a Separatist assault on the planet as an excuse to steal Argente's stuff. Due to its status as a Republic Sector Army headquarters, Ryloth was protected by a fleet of Venator-class Star Destroyers commanded by Admiral Dao, but this defense fleet was quickly overwhelmed by the Confederacy's initial attack fleet, led by the Neimoidian captain Ma Tuk. Tuk commanded the Separatist fleet on Tambor's behalf from his flagship, the Lucrehulk-class battleship Procura, which was supported by a number of Munificent-class star frigates. Captain Tuk's forces were augmented by squadrons of Vulture droids and the Confederacy's new Hyena bombers, which carried out bombing runs on Admiral Dow's ships before moving to bomb Republic forces on Ryloth's surface, where the Techno-Union droid army was already being deployed. As Tambor's droids battled Republic and Twi'lek forces on the ground, Tuk moved to finish off the defense fleet. After Admiral Dow reported the desperate situation at Ryloth to the Jedi Council, his flagship's reactor was disabled and his Star Destroyer was destroyed. Admiral Dow was killed and the rest of his fleet was destroyed in short order. Now, with naval supremacy, Captain Tuk established a blockade of Ryloth, positioning his flagship and several Munificent-class star frigates around the planet. They then deployed additional waves of battle droids to the surface. Republic forces on Ryloth's surface were crushed. General Imagundi, Captain Keeley, and what clones remained on the planet were all killed. Republic blockade runners were able to deliver supplies to the Twi'lek resistance, allowing them to survive for several months longer, but for the most part, Ryloth fell under Separatist control. Wat Tambor took over the planet and promptly began looting, taking everything of value his droids could find, regardless of whether it belonged to Pasal Agente or not. For several months, Tambor and his forces retained control of Ryloth. Eventually, however, the Republic was able to launch a counterattack. The Republic was only able to muster a small initial naval force for the operation due to pressure on other battlefronts. Admiral Yularen, Anakin Skywalker, and Ahsoka Tano were assigned to command the offensive, but they were only sent in with 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers, the Resolute, the Defender, and the Redeemer. Fortunately, the Separatist blockade seemed similarly small, consisting solely of the Lucrehulk-class battleship Procura and 2 Munificent-class star frigates. Skywalker and Yularen felt confident enough that they launched a full frontal assault on this small fleet, dispatching V-19 Torrents led by Ahsoka to lead the way. But as Republic forces pressed the offensive, 4 additional Munificent-class frigates jumped in, surrounding the Republic fleet. Swarms of Vulture droids overwhelmed the Republic starfighters and began suicide runs against Yularen's Star Destroyers, which the blockade ships were already tearing into. The Redeemer was destroyed, and the Defender was severely damaged. The Resolute also suffered extensive damage, including an explosion on one of its bridges that nearly killed Admiral Yularen. Republic forces were forced to retreat in disarray. With his forces cut in half, Skywalker ultimately chose to resort to war crimes to break the blockade. He ordered the Defender evacuated of everyone except himself and R2-D2 before taking the Star Destroyer back to Ryloth and pretending to surrender to Captain Tuk. He was able to stall for long enough to get the Defender close to the Procura. After his ship's sensors determined that Skywalker was the only life form aboard the Star Destroyer, Tuk realized what was happening and ordered the Star Destroyer destroyed. But it was too late. Skywalker programmed the ship to ram the Procura before fleeing in an escape pod. The Defender smashed into the Procura and destroyed it, and even though Tuk was also able to make it to an escape pod, CIS naval forces were effectively decapitated. Meanwhile, under Ahsoka Tano's command, the Resolute joined the battle, utilizing the Marg Sabel maneuver to shield its bridges and main hangar from enemy fire, luring the remaining fleet of Munificent-class star frigates in for an attack. While the droid commanders of the surviving Separatist ships were distracted, Tano led several squadrons of Y-wing bombers in shelling the heavy cruisers. Since the Procura was the only ship in the blockade with starfighter hangars, the Separatist cruisers were largely without starfighter cover, allowing Tano and her pilots to destroy several of them and severely damage the rest. The blockade was broken and Republic forces could begin the ground assault. After the breaking of the blockade, the remainder of Republic forces joined the fight. At least 2 additional Venator-class Star Destroyers were brought in to support the Resolute, while 3 Acclamated-class assault ships descended to Ryloth's surface to drop off the Republic's clone armies. The assault ships were initially impeded by a battery of ground-based Techno-Union J1 semi-autonomous proton cannons in the village of Nabat, commanded by tactical droid TX-20. One of the assault ships was heavily damaged by these cannons, forcing Republic ground forces to hold back, while Obi-Wan Kenobi and Ghost Company were sent in to neutralize the cannons. With a little help from the enslaved people of Nabat, Republic forces were successful in destroying the cannons, allowing the ground battle to resume in earnest. Mace Windu and the bulk of the Republic's ground forces landed near Nabat and then pressed on toward the capital, Lesu, which Tambor had made his personal fortress. Meanwhile, the naval battle continued. Admiral Yularen resumed command of the Republic fleet, while Skywalker took his starfighter and joined Tano in leading Republic V-19 Torrent and Y-Wing squadrons against what was left of the Separatist blockade. But additional CIS naval forces joined the battle, including several Providence-class carrier/destroyers and Recusant-class light frigates, which brought additional Vulture droids, Rogue-class starfighters, and Hyena bombers. The naval battle continued, but Republic forces were able to at least contain the Separatist reinforcements, preventing them from landing additional troops on Ryloth's surface. As a quick note, it's unknown what became of Martuk. He might have assumed command of Separatist naval forces after they arrived, or he might have been captured or killed by the Republic after the blockade was broken. Either way, he didn't show up in any later battles, so either he was killed or captured, or his superiors really weren't impressed by his performance. Eventually, the ground battle turned against the Confederacy. Tambor reluctantly prepared to evacuate Ryloth. As a last spiteful act, however, he sent out squadrons of Hyena bombers to carpet bomb every Twi'lek city they could hit, hoping to slow down or demoralize Republic forces. As the naval battle above was nearly won, Skywalker and Tano descended into Ryloth's atmosphere to take out these bombers. They narrowly managed to destroy the squadron meant for Lesu before it could bomb the city, saving the lives of Mace Windu, Cham Syndulla, Wat Tambor, and a whole lot of Twi'leks. Lesu was retaken by the Republic, and Wat Tambor was taken into Republic custody. Tambor had planned to evacuate before the fall of Lesu, but he waited until all his stolen treasure was evacuated. His tactical droid, TA-175, got tired of all his stalling and ultimately stole Tambor's escape shuttle, reporting to Count Dooku that Tambor was a dumbass and that he had been forced to abandon him. TA-175's shuttle was the last to leave Ryloth, and once it rendezvoused with the fleet in orbit, what remained of Separatist naval forces abandoned Ryloth. Isolated pockets of Techno-Union ground forces fought on, but for all intents and purposes, Ryloth had been liberated by the Republic. Star Wars: The Clone Wars had a bit of a rocky first season, but it still had some pretty great early moments, including the first ever episode produced for the series. This episode, Downfall of a Droid, wasn't the first released, but it was the first produced, and to be honest, you can kind of tell. The animation is rough, the lighting is wonky, and the music is noticeably different in tone from what the rest of the series went for. But even this rough draft of an episode gave us the Battle of Bothawui, one of the most entertaining space battles of the show's first season. In this video, we'll be breaking down the battle in detail. In late 22 BBY, General Grievous was on a bit of a roll. After the construction of Skytop Station, a listening post hidden in high orbit above one of Rusan's moons, the Confederacy had extensive intelligence about Republic battle formations in the southern slice, and Grievous was using it to the fullest, dealing Republic forces defeats after defeats along the Corellian run. As he came close to taking several whole sectors, the Jedi learned from Obi-Wan Kenobi's friend Dexter Jettster that the end goal of his campaign was to capture Bothawui, the home of the Bothan Spynet. The Bothans, as you might be aware, were master spies, and for thousands of years, their agents had changed the course of wars, ensured the rise and fall of whole empires, and made Bothawui one of the most powerful worlds in the Mid-Rim. The Bothans' home territory, an allied region around Bothawui simply known as Bothan Slice, declared neutrality at the start of the Clone Wars, and for months, it offered the services of the Bothan Spynet to both sides, playing the Republic and the Confederacy against each other to make profit. But in capturing Bothawui, Grievous had hoped to seize control of the whole Spynet, which would grant the Confederacy even more extensive intelligence about Republic fleet movements. This was something the Republic couldn't allow. With that said, the Republic could do precious little about the situation. The CIS Navy outnumbered its loyalist counterpart 4-1, and the Republic Navy was stretched thin on every battlefront.
The Jedi were only able to requisition a small flotilla of 3 Star Destroyers to defend Bothawui, which was placed under the command of General Skywalker, his Padawan Ahsoka Tano, and Admiral Yularen. Nonetheless, Skywalker's fleet made for Bothawui immediately, though they met heavy resistance along the way. Grievous led a small fleet of 4 heavy cruisers in interdicting Skywalker's forces in 3 separate battles, with the 2 fleets fighting to a draw each time. Ultimately, Skywalker was able to shake Grievous and make it to the Both system with his fleet intact, if with fewer starfighters than before, but the situation was still dire. It turned out that Grievous had only broken off his pursuit to attack Foleen, a loyalist holdout in the midst of Separatist territory on the Corellian Run. At Foleen, Grievous destroyed an entire Republic battle group, killing 8 Jedi and capturing the planet's king, prompting the planet's surrender. This made the Republic's already dire naval situation even worse. Not only did it see the loss of yet another Republic fleet, but it also gave the Separatists full control of a whole sector, allowing the Confederacy to focus their efforts on the other battlefronts. Grievous was thus able to pick up 2 more cruisers once he was done at Foleen, following which he made his way to Bothawui. Already battle-weary and now outnumbered 2-1, Skywalker's fleet couldn't beat Grievous in a head-on fight above Bothawui proper. Thus, Republic forces positioned themselves just beyond the rings of the gas giant Bothawui Prime, known to the locals as Golm, hoping to lure Grievous into a battle in a more favourable environment. Skywalker's fleet was composed of 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers. These were the Resolute, commanded by Admiral Yularen, the Pioneer, commanded by Commander Vontifor, and the Dauntless, commanded by Commander Isabre. Each had components of V-19 Torrent starfighters, led by Gold Squadron. These Star Destroyers were all new, all recently churned out by Allentene's 6 shipyards, but the constant skirmishing with Grievous's fleet had weakened the flotilla considerably, softening up the Star Destroyers and likely greatly reducing the size of their starfighter wings. Had it been at full strength, this fleet would have been insufficient to stop Grievous, even with the environmental advantage. But Skywalker came up with a plan to even the odds. His Star Destroyers also had GAR ground detachments aboard meant for use on Bothawui proper, including a number of ATTE walkers. As these walkers had magnetized feet and pressurized cabins, Skywalker had them positioned on some of the larger asteroids in Golm's rings, where they would be hidden until the time was right. This ATTE force was placed under the command of Captain Rex of Torrent Company. Grievous, meanwhile, had a fleet of 6 Munificent-class star frigates with large accompanying Vulture droid wings. This was likely the only vanguard of his invasion force, as none of these ships were carriers and none would have had room for a planetary invasion army, but it was enough to crush Skywalker and proceed to blockade Bothawui. Confident in his odds, Grievous ordered his forces to engage Republic forces on their terms just beyond the rings of Golm. He reasoned that an attack above or below the plane of the rings would give Republic forces an advantage, as his cruisers' main guns were forward mounted and the Star Destroyers were top mounted, so he ordered his fleet to advance through the asteroid field. As the advance began, he also ordered his ships to array their deflector shields double front, both to protect against incoming fire and to minimize damage from asteroid impacts. The asteroids, Grievous reasoned, would be sufficient to shield the fleet from behind. At first, Grievous's plan went pretty smoothly. While Anakin Skywalker led Gold Squadron and the other Star Destroyers' V-19 Torrent wings into battle, Grievous's cruisers emerged from the rings and opened fire on the Republic fleet. All 3 of the Republic Star Destroyers sustained heavy damage in this opening barrage, and one was crippled in short order. Skywalker's starfighter assault seemingly fared similarly well. Gold Squadron lost several pilots in an attack run against Grievous's cruisers, and Skywalker ultimately ordered the rest of his pilots to pull back. Had the battle continued this way, Grievous would soon have been victorious, but he had failed to notice the ATTE walkers hidden in Golm's rings. Once the cruisers had passed beyond the asteroids in which the ATTEs were hidden, Rex ordered the walkers to open fire. The mass drivers of the walkers dealt considerable damage to the unshielded aft sections of the Separatist cruisers with just their first salvo, throwing the whole offensive into disarray. Admiral Yularen then ordered the remaining Star Destroyers to open fire, while Skywalker went on a one-man attack run against the crippled Separatist cruisers, targeting their command bridges with impunity. In a matter of minutes, several of Grievous's ships were destroyed, and Grievous realized the battle was lost. Ordering the droid crews of his remaining ships to press on and deal as much damage as they could, he attempted to flee the battle in his personal starfighter, the Soulless One. Skywalker noticed his attempted escape, however, and pursued, hoping to kill Grievous and thus cripple the Confederacy's leadership. As he pursued, however, Skywalker's starfighter was struck by shrapnel and severely damaged, causing it to suffer engine failure and crash into the asteroid field. Grievous was able to make his escape, though his entire fleet was destroyed. The Republic won the Battle of Bothawui, but for Anakin Skywalker, the victory was bittersweet. After the end of the battle, Captain Rex led a search and rescue mission that was able to retrieve the unconscious Skywalker from the wreck of his starfighter, but Skywalker's astromech droid, R2-D2, was nowhere to be found. The droid had been captured by the Trandoshan scavenger, Gar Nacht, who had descended on the battlefield virtually the minute it ended. After learning of the droid's importance to the Republic, Nacht attempted to sell it to General Grievous, while Skywalker and his Padawan set out on a mission to rescue R2. Grievous's offensive in the southern slice was cut short by the Battle of Bothawui, but the Confederacy still maintained an advantage in the region for months to come, with Grievous winning other battles here to make up for his loss at Bothawui. The Bothans, meanwhile, remained free of Separatist control, though they still insisted on neutrality for the rest of the war, even after other Separatist attacks on colonies across Bothan space.
The bulk of the Clone Wars were fought out on the Galactic Rim, but contrary to many of the Republic's other wars, there was also considerable fighting in the core worlds as well. Many of these battles in the core had the potential to change the entire course of the conflict, offering control of vital hyperspace routes or considerable economic and military power to the victor. The battle we'll be discussing today, the Battle of Rendili, was one such battle. In it, the CIS nearly seized control of one of the Republic's most important shipbuilders, only to be thwarted, in the nick of time, by the efforts of a handful of Jedi. Rendili was one of the core founders of the Republic, and for 25,000 years, it was a Republic fortress world. Its status as a core founder made it wealthy and important, but its wealth and power were increased considerably after the founding of Rendili Star Drive on the planet in 20,000 BBY. Rendili Star Drive, together with fellow Rendili firms Rendili Hyperworks, Golan Arms, and Rendili/Vangevalis Drive Yards, was one of the top starship building corporations in the entire galaxy, and for tens of thousands of years, it was the Republic Navy's primary supplier of warships. Rendili produced some of the most iconic warships in the history of the galaxy. The Hammerhead-class cruiser, which served as the backbone of the Republic Navy for almost the entirety of both the old and new Sith Wars, was a product of Rendili Hyperworks, while Rendili Star Drive designed and manufactured the Dreadnought-class heavy cruiser, which was one of the most widely used capital ships in the galaxy before the outbreak of the Clone Wars. For tens of thousands of years, Rendili's role as the galaxy's #1 builder of warships was largely unchallenged. But after the end of the new Sith Wars, the Republic Navy was dissolved, and Rendili lost its prestige as its primary supplier. Things worsened in 100 BBY when Kuat and its own shipbuilding firm, Kuat Drive Yards, began to overshadow Rendili Star Drive and its sister companies, earning the ire of many on Rendili. These tensions were exacerbated when the Clone Wars broke out, and KDY, not Rendili Star Drive, was chosen to be the primary supplier of the reformed Republic Navy. The Republic didn't cut Rendili out of the loop entirely, however, and perhaps as consolation to the aggrieved company, it sponsored a joint venture between Rendili Star Drive and Kuat Drive Yards to design a new backbone for the Republic Navy. This joint venture, the Victor Initiative, led to the creation of the first Star Destroyers, with the two shipyards' collaboration producing the Victory-class Star Destroyer in 20 BBY. But by the time the Victory was finally deployed, the Republic had already started using the Venator-class Star Destroyer, a branch project of the Victor Initiative that was exclusively designed and produced by KDY. Rendili was undercut by Kuat yet again. As you can imagine, the people of Rendili weren't terribly happy over this state of affairs. Not long after the completion of the Victor Initiative, there was unrest on the planet, which led to the establishment of the Independent Provisional Government of Rendili, a separatist government that announced intentions to join the CIS. This was seriously bad news for the Republic. Not only would a separatist Rendili give the Confederacy a stronghold in the heart of the core worlds and control of Rendili's famed shipyards, but it would also give the Confederacy control of the Rendili home defense fleet. This was an enormous fleet of dreadnought-class heavy cruisers that represented one of the largest planetary security forces in the galaxy, and now a serious threat to loyalist core worlds. Fortunately for the Republic, the Rendili home fleet wasn't as eager as the new planetary government to turn its back on the Republic. Many in the fleet, including its commanding officer, Jace Dallin, were torn between loyalty to their homeworld and to the Republic they had served for years. Thus, the Republic's response to Rendili's secession was to send a Jedi-led task force to the planet to negotiate with the commanders of the home fleet, hoping to talk them into siding with the Republic against the Independent Provisional Government. Jedi Master Plo Koon and Republic Navy Captain Jan Dodona were sent to the Rendili flagship, the Mersul Kebir, to negotiate with Dallin, as the three men had all fought together during the Stark Hyperspace War. Meanwhile, the Republic had a fleet of 3 acclimated-class assault ships, the flagship Sundriver, Triumph, and the Donita, stationed nearby under the command of Sacy Tin and Commander Adar Talon, with orders to destroy the Rendili dreadnoughts if the negotiations fell through. As negotiations continued, the Republic sent Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Commander Cody to join the Republic fleet above the planet, though Kenobi was promptly diverted to investigate the missing zoological ship Tatavian 4 in a nearby system. After days of negotiations, Captain Dallin was swayed by Plo Koon and Dodona, and he decided to order the Rendili home fleet to defect to the Republic. But before he could give the order, a number of the younger officers in his crew, led by Lieutenant Melor Yago and Lieutenant Galan, staged a mutiny. They arrested Dallin and the Republic negotiators for treason against Rendili and declared that the Rendili home fleet would side with the Confederacy. To prevent the Republic fleet from attacking, Yago claimed Dodona, Plo Koon, and Dallin as hostages, vowing to execute them if the Republic attempted to destroy the Rendili dreadnoughts. This was just a move to stall for time. Yago was in contact with General Grievous, who promised that CIS Navy reinforcements would arrive to assist the Rendili home fleet in approximately 20 hours. Once these 20 hours were up, Yago contacted General Tin and offered him an ultimatum. The Republic fleet would withdraw within 1 hour, or he would start killing hostages anyway, starting with Plo Koon. Seeing no way to rescue the hostages, Tin planned to just destroy the Rendili home fleet as ordered. But Anakin Skywalker had a different idea. Due to the design of the Rendili dreadnoughts, they could be disabled with precision charges placed on their aft sections, which would knock out the ship's navigation systems. Skywalker proposed that he load up his starfighter, the Azure Angel II, with charges to deploy against the cruisers, but Tin shot this plan down. Around the same time, Obi-Wan Kenobi returned from the Tatavian 4 with Jedi renegade Quinlan Vos in tow. Tin had Vos thrown in the brig, but his attention was soon drawn away when a pair of separatist Lucrehulk-class core ships emerged from hyperspace. As the core ships began deploying Vulture droids, Tin ordered the Republic fleet to engage. The Triumph and Donita would focus on the core ships, while the Sundriver attacked the Mersul Kebir and its squadron of 5 other Rendili dreadnoughts. V-19 Torrents, LAAT gunships and Delta-7 Jedi starfighters were deployed, and Anakin, against orders, loaded up the Azure Angel II with precision charges anyway, planning to make his attack run on the dreadnought's navigation systems after all. During the battle, several of the Republic assault ships took heavy damage. One hit caused power failures on the Sundriver, which deactivated the energy fields on Quinlan Vos's cell. Vos, with Obi-Wan in tow, then reclaimed his personal ship, the Scorp Ion, to use in boarding the Mersul Kebir and freeing the hostages there. As the battle turned in the Confederacy's favor, conflict between loyalists and separatists continued across the Rendili home fleet. This led Yago to order the crews of the other Rendili dreadnoughts to slave their navigation systems to those of the Mersul Kebir. That way, if the Loyalists retook any of the other cruisers, Yago could force the whole fleet to jump to Separatist space from the flagship anyway. When Republic forces detected this, Tin ordered the Sundriver to ram the Mercil Kabir in the hopes of destroying it. But this proved unnecessary when Anakin Skywalker blew up the Mercil Kabir's navigation systems, stranding the entire Rendili home fleet. Around the same time, Kenobi and Vos freed Plo Koon, Captain Dodner, and Captain Darlin, and the 5 men led the remaining Loyalist officers in retaking the ship. Darlin executed Melor Yago and ordered the home fleet to join the Republic fleet in the battle against the core ships. In short order, all Separatist assets were destroyed and the remaining mutineers were executed. The Republic was victorious. After the battle, the Rendili home fleet was brought to Coruscant to be integrated into the Republic Navy. Some of the Rendili dreadnoughts were converted into dungeon ships meant to transport captured Dark Jedi, which saw extensive use during the Great Jedi Purge. In the wake of the battle, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine convinced the Senate to nationalize all remaining planetary security forces, folding all the home fleets in the Republic into the Republic Navy. Most of Star Wars The Clone Wars' most impressive battles came during the show's later seasons, but early on, it had some particularly good ones. One of the first season's best was the Sky Battle of Quell, a battle glimpsed at the start of the episode Jedi Crash. This was a naval battle, but it was fought within a planet's upper atmosphere, giving it a distinctive aesthetic. There are few things cooler than watching vast spaceships battle in a planet's atmosphere, their undersides burning up due to the heat of re-entry, their starfighters leaving contrails in their wake. Apart from being cool, Quell was also a major Republic defeat, one that nearly caused the death of Anakin Skywalker, and in this video, we'll be doing a full analysis of it. Precious little is known about Quell. The only depiction of its surface actually comes from LEGO Star Wars 3, which is non-canon but depicts Quell as a barren planet of bluish-grey rock formations, as its appearance from orbit would suggest. Canon sources state that Quell was an unremarkable terrestrial world with nothing on its surface that would attract outside interest. It was only ever important because of its location. Quell was in the Nuiri sector on the edge of Separatist space, located along the Saleucami corridor, one of the Outer Rim's most important hyperspace routes. Running from remote Saleucami out in the New Territories to the periphery of Hutt space, intersecting the Hydian Way and Polemian trade route as it went, the Saleucami corridor was ancient, and for thousands of years, it was one of the only routes into the northern Outer Rim. Even after that region was more thoroughly explored, it remained important. The stretch between the Polemian and Hydian wound between Mandalorian space and the Radama Void, the boundary region of Sith space, and it represented a narrow corridor of Republic civilization in the desolate and lawless Trans-Hydian region. During the Clone Wars, this leg of the route became particularly important because both the Outer Polemian and the Outer Hydian were under Separatist control, and the Republic's tenuous grip on the route was all that prevented Separatist forces from the two theaters from linking up. The Saleucami corridor also provided the Republic with invasion vectors for both pockets of Separatist territory. This was also important since both the Outer Hydian and Outer Polemian were vital Separatist strongholds. The Hydian Way Enclave, known as the Sereno Theater, contained many of the Confederacy's wealthiest and most politically influential worlds, while the Polemian Route Enclave, known as the Felucia Theater, contained the foundry of the Confederacy, a string of vital industrial worlds that fueled the Separatist war effort. The Republic launched many incursions into Separatist space on either side of the Trans-Hydian, and during one such campaign on the Polemian side of the route, Republic and Separatist forces clashed over otherwise insignificant Quell. The Republic fleet at Quell was commanded by Jedi General Aayla Secura and her clone liaison, Marshal Commander Bly of the 327th Star Corps. Secura's fleet consisted of at least 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers, led by the flagship Liberty, supported by V-19 Torrent squadrons, LAAT gunships, and Delta-7B starfighters. But at Quell, Secura and her fleet ran into a much larger force, commanded by tactical droid TF-1726. This droid had a fleet of at least 7 Munificent-class star frigates with Vulture Droid escort, as well as B-1 battle droid and jetpack-equipped B-2 RP super battle droids to act as boarding troops. The Republic was gravely outmatched, and it didn't take long after the start of the battle for things to start looking grim. The Republic's starfighter squadrons were quickly overwhelmed, and TF-1726 ordered his ships to carry out a merciless turbolaser barrage against the Republic fleet. Sakura's ships were all badly damaged and forced to flee into Quell's upper atmosphere, where TF-1726 pursued them, keeping up the assault. As the battle continued and the Star Destroyers began to suffer increasing amounts of damage, which was intensified by strain caused by Quell's gravity, they began to struggle to stay aloft. Sakura was ultimately forced to call for help before she and her men were all killed. Help soon arrived under the command of Anakin Skywalker and Admiral Yularen. Skywalker and Yularen were unable to muster a large enough fleet to salvage the battle, but they hoped to be able to rescue Sakura and her men from their doomed ships. To that end, they brought along their flagship, the Venator-class Star Destroyer Resolute, and a Consular-class corvette, with the plan being that the Resolute would fend off Separatist forces, while the corvette and a fleet of Republic gunships evacuated the Liberty, Sakura's flagship. By the time Skywalker's forces arrived, it was already too late for the other Star Destroyers, which were rapidly plummeting into Quell's atmosphere and beginning to break apart. The Liberty was soon to follow. Skywalker, his apprentice Ahsoka Tano, and Captain Rex led the gunship fleet in boarding the Liberty, while the corvette docked in the Star Destroyer's ventral hangar. Not long after the Republic reinforcements arrived, however, TF-1726 deployed a swarm of B-2 RP rocket droids to board the Liberty and exterminate its crew. The rocket droids also attacked Skywalker's gunships, forcing several of them down, including the lead ship, which crashed into the Liberty. Skywalker and company survived, however, and they joined Commander Bly and the 327th in fighting off the Liberty's boarders while the ship's crew evacuated. Through unknown means, the B-2 RPs received reinforcements in the form of B-1 battle droids, possibly delivered via standard boarding craft. Meanwhile, TF-1726 was growing impatient. Calculating that he should have won the battle 4 minutes ago, he switched to more aggressive tactics, ordering a renewed turbolaser barrage on the Liberty, which he wanted destroyed immediately. When one of his crew pointed out that the boarding party was still aboard, TF-1726 gave us one of the best droid moments of Star Wars: The Clone Wars.
This is taking too long. Destroy that cruiser.
But sir, there are still hundreds of droids on board.
I don't care.
With that, the Separatist cruisers concentrated fire on the Liberty, and the Star Destroyer began to fall apart. As the Liberty fell apart around them, Sakura, Skywalker, and what was left of Republic forces aboard the ship broke off from their battle with the rocket droids and made for the corvette docked in the hangar. They weren't able to reach the ship before the Liberty began suffering catastrophic explosions, which ripped through the Star Destroyer's corridors. Using the Force, Skywalker was able to hold back the explosion long enough for the others to make it aboard the corvette, but he was seriously injured when the blast was released. Tano managed to rescue him and drag him aboard the corvette, which detached just in time, but Skywalker nonetheless needed urgent medical attention. The Liberty plummeted into Quell's lower atmosphere soon after, breaking up as it went, leaving the Resolute as the only Star Destroyer left on board. Ultimately, only Bly, Sakura, and a handful of clones had made it onto the corvette with Skywalker, Rex, and Tano, and most of the Liberty's crew was presumably killed. With the Separatist fleet now bearing down on the Resolute and Skywalker in critical condition, the survivors needed to dock with the Resolute and get away from Quell as soon as possible. But as the corvette was approaching the Resolute, it was strafed by Vulture droids, which caused the ship's hyperdrive to activate. The corvette was forced to pull away from the Resolute as it shot off into hyperspace on an unknown course. On the bridge of the Resolute, Yularen ordered his crew to determine the corvette's likely trajectory and then prepare to retreat. TF-1726 would have his victory, if a few minutes later than he would have liked. The corvette, meanwhile, ended up crashing on Maridon after a close encounter with a star, where the Jedi and the clones had an additional series of adventures before they were able to return to the Republic fleet. Skywalker ended up recovering from his wounds, and all of the Jedi ended up surviving both Quell and Maridon, but ultimately, all of the clones aboard the corvette, except Rex and Bly, died along the way. The evacuation ultimately only rescued 2 people out of a crew of over 7,000. After the Resolute withdrew, the Sky Battle of Quell ended in a decisive Separatist victory, frustrating another Republic attempt to break Separatist lines around the foundry of the Confederacy. In one of the last speeches he gave before the end of the Clone Wars, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine labeled Saleucami, together with Felucia and Megiddo, part of the Triad of Evil. 3 Separatist stronghold worlds that were selected as the top targets for the Outer Rim sieges. But while Felucia and Megiddo had been battlefields for most of the war, Saleucami was new as a priority target. At the end of the war, it was subjected to a 5-month siege and one of the most grueling battles of the entire conflict. But just 2 years earlier, it had been entirely unremarkable. Before the Techno Union and the Morgakai Shadow Army set up their fortresses there, Saleucami was just another Separatist backwater world. Even then, the siege of Saleucami was not the first battle fought on the planet. In early 21 BBY, Saleucami's orbit and backcountry briefly became battlefields due to an encounter between General Grievous and the Republic fleet. In this video, we'll be telling the story of that battle. The story of this battle begins in the Arda system in the Gordian Reach, a neutral world far from civilization near Yavin 4. In the wake of the Second Battle of Geonosis, Jedi Council member Eth Koth began patrolling the region aboard his flagship, the Venator-class Star Destroyer Steadfast, looking for hints of Separatist activity. But on one patrol, he was ambushed by a Separatist fleet led by General Grievous himself. With 3 Munificent-class star frigates in his flagship, a Recusant-class destroyer, Grievous easily overpowered Koth's forces and boarded the Steadfast. There, he defeated Koth in a lightsaber duel and took him prisoner, destroying the Steadfast and wiping out the rest of the Jedi Master's crew. After this decisive victory, Grievous couldn't help but gloat. He sent a transmission to the Jedi Council taunting them over the capture of one of their own. As he tortured Koth, he promised that the Jedi Master's death would be slow and painful. It was a disturbing message, but as the Jedi Council reviewed the footage, Commander Wolf noticed something. Koth was using hand signals to communicate a secret message. They quickly deduced that the message was a set of coordinates leading to Saleucami, which, presumably, was where Grievous's fleet was located. Hoping to rescue Master Koth before Grievous murdered him, Jedi Generals Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Adi Gallia assembled the fleet and set off for Saleucami at once. Little did they know that this was exactly as Grievous had planned. His message to the Jedi Council had been bait. He knew full well that Koth would likely find a way to leak his location. Indeed, he was counting on it, because while Grievous was pleased with himself for capturing a member of the Jedi Council, he considered Eth Koth to be a lesser prize. Grievous wanted to capture Kenobi and Skywalker, and he believed the threat of Koth's death would be all that was necessary to lure them into battle against his fleet. He was, of course, correct. Kenobi and Skywalker weren't stupid, however. They suspected that Grievous hoped to capture them, and they planned to use that to their advantage. They came to Saleucami with a moderately sized fleet, consisting of 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers, 1 Acclimated-class assault ship, 3 Consular-class corvettes, and 1 Architant-class light cruiser, with V-19 Torrents and BTLB Y-wings for support. Admiral Yularen would command the fleet from one of the Star Destroyers, while Kenobi would take the much more vulnerable Architans as his flagship. Kenobi let Grievous know which ship he was on after arriving from hyperspace, engaging in a brief bit of banter with the general before Grievous cut off communications. Kenobi hoped that Grievous would attempt to board his ship, where he would be distracted while Skywalker and Gallia boarded his flagship with an Eta-class shuttle. If the plan worked out, Kenobi would trap Grievous aboard his cruiser while Skywalker and Gallia rescued Eth Koth. At first, the plan seemed to be working smoothly. After cutting off communications, Grievous ordered his ships to open fire on the Republic fleet, while Yularen had his ships do the same. While the Star Destroyers and Assault Ship held back and peppered Grievous's fleet with turbolaser fire, the corvettes and Kenobi's light cruiser moved in to engage the Separatists at a closer range. The corvettes began a flanking attack to sow chaos behind Separatist lines, while Kenobi's cruiser closed on Grievous's flagship. Grievous had his crew pull the destroyer up alongside Kenobi's ship, catch it in a tractor beam, and prepare to board the cruiser. Grievous then set off to personally lead the boarding party, leaving the naval battle under the command of tactical droid TV-94. Meanwhile, Skywalker and Gallia brought their shuttle out of hyperspace, docking on Grievous's flagship without detection. They boarded the Separatist destroyer and made their way to the bridge, fighting waves of battle droids as they went. At the same time, Grievous was leading a team of commando droids and Magna Guards in boarding the Republic cruiser. The ship's defenders were quickly overwhelmed, and Grievous soon came face to face with Kenobi, whom he engaged in a lightsaber duel on the cruiser's bridge. During the battle, he revealed that he had anticipated Kenobi's plan. He was well aware that Skywalker had boarded his ship, and he had set a trap for the Jedi Knight on his destroyer's bridge. When Skywalker and Gallia reached the bridge, they were ambushed by commando droids, while TV-94 revealed that they had been expected. But the Jedi were able to fight their way out of Grievous's trap. The tactical droid began to torture Master Koth to death to distract the Jedi, but Skywalker and Gallia were able to destroy him and all the commando droids before Koth was killed. The two Jedi rescued Koth and then set out to make their escape. Meanwhile, Grievous was forced to retreat from his duel with Kenobi and attempted to flee back to his ship. Kenobi ordered the cruiser's crew to sever the docking connection with the destroyer, hoping to trap Grievous on the ship. Grievous, meanwhile, ordered his crew to open fire on the cruiser's engine to prevent it from breaking away. As the cruiser came under fire and Grievous's destroyer began suffering damage from the battle with Yularen's fleet, Kenobi and Commander Cody pursued Grievous into the docking tube, where they were joined by Adi Gallia. But the damage to the cruiser caused the tube to rupture, distracting the Jedi and allowing Grievous to escape. He made for a C-9979 landing craft bound for Saleucami, while Kenobi, Gallia, and Cody met up with Skywalker and Koth, who were preparing to flee back to the Republic fleet aboard the Jedi's shuttle. Both Grievous and the Jedi fled the destroyer, but as they made their respective escapes, Kenobi's cruiser was destroyed. Debris from the explosion damaged Grievous's landing craft, sending it hurtling towards Saleucami. Grievous was forced to abandon it via an escape pod, leaving him trapped in Saleucami's wilderness. The Jedi were able to get Eth Koth back to their fleet, but the battle wasn't over yet. With Grievous trapped on Saleucami, they still had a chance to capture him, and Kenobi rallied a small landing party with the hopes of doing exactly that. Skywalker, meanwhile, joined Yularen in command of the naval battle. As Kenobi set off to Saleucami's surface in pursuit of Grievous, an additional 4 Venator-class Star Destroyers joined the fight, giving the Republic fleet an overwhelming advantage. With both Grievous and TV-94 out of the fight, the Separatist fleet was leaderless, and all of its ships were destroyed or fled the battle in short order. On the ground, Kenobi, Captain Rex, and a team of clones began a manhunt for General Grievous, searching the landing sites of several escape pods that had crashed across Saleucami's backcountry. During the search, Captain Rex was severely wounded by a sniper and left with civilian farmers to heal. Rex and one of those farmers, a clone deserter named Cutler Quain, ended up having to defend the farm from commando droids. Meanwhile, Kenobi managed to find Grievous's trail and caught up to the general just as he was signaling a shuttle to to escape the planet with. Despite their best efforts, Kenobi and the clones were ultimately unable to prevent Grievous from boarding the shuttle and escaping Saleucami. The droid general would live to fight another day. Following Grievous's escape and Captain Rex's recovery, Republic forces withdrew from Saleucami, and they made no attempt to wrest control of the system from the Separatists. They would return a year and a half later, however, this time drawn not by the hope of capturing General Grievous, but for the fear of the Separatist clone army that was being grown in the planet's lava caves. But we've done a video on that battle already. One of Star Wars The Clone Wars' most beloved characters was Asajj Ventress, Dooku's assassin turned Night Sister turned bounty hunter. Contrary to popular belief, Ventress wasn't created for The Clone Wars. She predates the show by 5 years, having first appeared in a litany of EU stories before making an appearance in the show. But The Clone Wars took Ventress in a new direction, causing plenty of continuity issues along the way, but still adding to her recognition as an interesting and multi-layered character. That journey started in Season 3 of the show during the Battle of Sullust. But this battle was more than just a backdrop for Ventress's character development. There's a lot more interesting lore behind it than the show lets on. In this video, we'll be discussing the battle and its surrounding circumstances in detail. There's a decent chance you already know a fair bit about Sullust. It was, after all, one of the most important planets in the Outer Rim. Home to the powerful Sora Subcorporation, a Commerce Guild member known for its renowned shipwrights, Sullust was one of the galaxy's primary producers of starships, one of the greatest economic powers in the region. Together with neighboring Eriadu, Sullust controlled a large share of the trade that went up and down the Rimmer trade route, one of the most important hyperspace routes in the galaxy on which it was located. With the outbreak of the Clone Wars, Sullust became even more important. This wasn't only due to its shipyards, but also because of its location. Nearly the whole Rimmer trade route fell under Separatist control during the Clone Wars, including the entirety of the route past the Inner Rim, with the exception of a small pocket of Loyalist territory in the Outer Rim. A lone Republic redoubt in the midst of hostile territory. This tiny pocket of Loyalist space contained Sullust and Eriadu, and for the first few months of the war, these planets were essential to the Republic war effort. If the whole Rimmer had fallen under Separatist control, the Confederacy's supply lines in the southern theater of the galaxy would have been near unbreakable, and the Republic's control of a full quadrant of the galaxy would have been in jeopardy. Thus, the Republic waged a constant war from its lone pocket of territory on the Rimmer. Under the command of Brigadier Gideon Tarkin of Eriadu, Republic and PSF forces in the region were divided into priority theaters, mustered at Eriadu and Sullust, and dispatched to hotspots along the Rimmer. Eriadu and Sullust were strongholds of the Republic, keeping the fires of separatism at bay. That is, until Sullust seceded. By the time of the Clone Wars, Sora Sub pretty much controlled the Sullustan government, and through it, the Commerce Guild exerted considerable pressure over Sullust to secede. Sullust eventually gave in and switched sides, going from being a loyalist military stronghold to a separatist one. The war on the Rimmer promptly turned against the Republic, pushing loyalist forces back to Eriadu. In late 22 BBY, 1 month after his secession, Brigadier Tarkin led a Republic Navy task force to Sullust in the hopes of retaking the planet and turning the tide in the theater. But there was a traitor in Tarkin's fleet, and they ultimately cost the Republic the battle. This Battle of Sullust was a disaster for the Republic, and it would be months before the Republic could muster up another attack. For now, Sullust would remain a separatist stronghold. Fast forward to 21 BBY, nearly a year later. By this point, the Republic apparently felt confident enough to try again, sparking the battle we saw in Star Wars The Clone Wars. This time, Republic forces at Sullust were under the command of Jedi Generals Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, who led Republic starfighter forces from their Delta 7B interceptors, and Admiral Yularen, who commanded Republic naval forces from the bridge of the Venator-class Star Destroyer, the Resolute. Yularen and the Jedi came to Sullust with a respectably large fleet. The Republic brought along 5 Venator-class Star Destroyers, the Resolute included, plus 3 Architons-class light cruisers, 3 Consular-class corvettes, 1 Acclimated-class assault ship, and 1 Pelter-class frigate, all supported by V-19 Torrents, BTLB Y-wing bombers, and ARC-170s. Presumably, the assault ship was carrying an army for a ground invasion of Sullust. The Separatists also brought a sizable fleet to the battle. This was led by a Providence-class carrier/destroyer, the flagship of CIS Commander and Dark Acolyte Asajj Ventress. The rest of the fleet consisted of 2 Recusant-class light destroyers and 6 Munificent-class star frigates supported by Vulture droids, Hyena-class bombers, and brand new droid tri-fighters. The fleet was commanded by TJ-912, who was accompanied by Asajj Ventress herself, who led Separatist starfighter forces from her Geonosis-class starfighter. From the beginning, the battle was fierce. The Republic's corvettes moved in to engage the larger Separatist warships at close range, but came under heavy fire, with at least one of them being destroyed. Some of the Republic Star Destroyers, including the Resolute, adopted offensive tactics as well. As starfighters clashed all around it, they closed on some of the Confederacy's heavy cruisers, subjecting them to a turbo laser barrage. Ventress responded with equally brazen tactics, leading 2 wings of the new tri-fighters in an all-out assault on the Resolute. She dispatched 1 wing to take out the Star Destroyer's starboard engines and the other to disable its port shield generators, while she herself went directly for the Star Destroyer's bridge, hoping to kill Admiral Yularen and decapitate the Republic fleet. Republic forces at Sullust were unfamiliar with tri-fighters and were woefully unprepared for their assault. As Ventress planned, the Resolute was crippled and then destroyed, robbing the Republic fleet of its flagship, though Admiral Yularen was able to escape before the Star Destroyer was lost. After the demise of the Resolute, Ventress redirected her attention to Kenobi and Skywalker, hoping to kill them and complete her decapitation strike. After a hectic starfighter battle, all 3 of them crashed onto the hangar deck of Ventress's flagship, where a lightsaber duel began. On the other side of the galaxy, however, Darth Sidious felt a disturbance in the Force. He could sense Ventress's growing power, and it made him suspicious of his apprentice, Count Dooku, who he believed was plotting to overthrow him and training Ventress to serve as his own Sith apprentice. When Sidious confronted Dooku over this, the Count denied the accusation, but Sidious then ordered him to prove it. He wanted Dooku to kill her. Reluctantly, Dooku agreed. By this point, the battle was beginning to turn against Ventress's forces, and Ventress herself was cornered by Kenobi and Skywalker. She contacted Dooku for assistance, only to learn that the reinforcements he had previously ordered to Sullust had been ordered to withdraw, and that Dooku was going to leave her to die. Furious, Ventress attempted to redeem herself in Dooku's eyes by killing Kenobi and Skywalker, but Dooku ordered TJ-912 to open fire on Ventress's command ship, despite the fact that this would destroy much of the Separatist fleet. TJ-912 complied, and the Separatist fleet turned on its flagship, crippling it within minutes. On orders from the tactical droid, a Hyena bomber even carried out a suicide run on the main hangar with the intent of killing Ventress and the Jedi in one fell swoop. Kenobi and Skywalker managed to flee the doomed ship in time, while Ventress attempted to do the same in her own damaged fighter. She only just managed to clear the hangar before the whole ship was destroyed. After the destruction of the command ship, TJ-912 ordered Separatist forces to withdraw, leaving the Republic victorious. Both sides presumed Asajj Ventress was dead, but a team of scavengers picking over the wreckage from the battle discovered otherwise. Ventress commandeered their ship and took it to Dathomir, where she sought out the Night Sisters. Meanwhile, despite the heavy losses Republic forces suffered during the battle, the Republic took control of Sullust. It's unknown whether a ground invasion of the planet was launched after the Navy established orbital control, but either way, Sullust switched sides yet again, apparently with minimal repercussions. Sullustan separatist Biolas Bribs, who was at once Sullust's senator, head of state, and the CEO of Sorosub, was removed from power by Sorosub's corporate board and replaced in all 3 roles by Sinsub, a loyalist. Sullust seems to have remained under Republic control for the rest of the war, as Sinsub was still in power by the start of the Galactic Civil War when he declared Sullust's firm support for the Empire. If you remember the Battle of Lola Sayu, the centerpiece of the Clone Wars' Citadel rescue arc, It's probably because of the seeming death of Echo in the surface battle, or for the first meeting between Anakin Skywalker and then Captain Wilhoff Tarkin. But there was also one of the show's more engaging space battles at its climax, which will be the subject of our video today. The Republic Navy's involvement in the Battle of Lola Sayu could have changed the course of the entire Clone Wars, or it might have had the war itself not been a Sith plot. Lola Sayu was an interesting planet. Much like Peragus 2, it was a fractured world. Part of the planet had been blasted off in some ancient cataclysm, and its molten core was exposed to space. The nature of the cataclysm that created this unusual feature is unknown, but if Lola Sayu was anything like Peragus, its mantle probably contained some volatile substance that was blown up in a chain reaction at some point. The part of the planet that wasn't shattered was volcanic and strewn with sulfuric lakes, but it somehow had a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere. Lola Sayu was obviously unstable. Ever since the original cataclysm it had endured, parts of its crust had been breaking off into space. But the northwestern part of the planet was still somewhat stable, and it was a good location for a fortress. The ancient cataclysm had filled the Lola Sayu system with debris, which made navigation to and from the planet challenging and thus easy to control. The surface was inhospitable, and there were no settlements or sentient life anywhere on the planet. It was these characteristics that made Lola Sayu the perfect location for the Citadel. Built and maintained by the Republic and Jedi Order, the Citadel was established more than 500 years before the Clone Wars. It was meant to serve as a maximum security prison for rogue Jedi, an impregnable dungeon that not even the most gifted Dark Jedi could escape from. Lola Sayu's unpleasant surface conditions and restricted access made escape even harder, and the Citadel itself was packed with all sorts of clever defenses. It was the perfect prison, and the Jedi hoped that they could use it to safely contain any Darksiders that cropped up in their ranks on Lola Sayu. There was just one small problem with that. When the Clone Wars broke out, Lola Sayu, which was located in the Belderone sector of the Outer Rim, fell within Separatist space. The CIS captured the planet and started using the Citadel as a prison for regular Jedi captured on the battlefield, where they would be tortured until they broke or were killed. The Citadel's already formidable defenses were augmented by legions of BX series commando droids, LM-432 crab droids, and a fleet of warships in orbit. The whole operation was placed under the command of tactical droid K2B4 and Commandant O.C. Sobek, who answered directly to Count Dooku himself. For a while, the Republic didn't really do anything about the Citadel. There wasn't much they could do, truth be told. The Republic simply lacked the resources to recapture the planet, and for a long time, rescuing the Jedi taken there to be interrogated was written off as impossible, right up until they were left with no other choice. During one 21 BBY mission, Jedi Master Evan Peel had uncovered information about the fabled Nexus route, a secret hyperspace route that cut through the heart of the deep core, providing access to the core worlds and the heart of Separatist space alike. Either side could use the Nexus route as an invasion corridor to strike at the heart of the other. It would give the Republic a clear route to Yag Dul, a key Separatist naval stronghold, and it would give the Confederacy a straight shot at Coruscant itself. But Master Peel was ambushed by Separatist forces and captured before he could relay the coordinates of the Nexus route to the Jedi Council, and he was brought to the Citadel for interrogation. The Jedi Council deemed it absolutely vital that he be rescued, lest Count Dooku learn the secrets of the Nexus route. But as we already mentioned, this was much easier said than done. Anakin Skywalker ultimately came up with a unique plan that could get a small Republic strike team through the blockade. The organic members of the team would freeze themselves in carbonite, and a droid crew would ferry them to Lola Sayu's surface aboard a stolen Separatist shuttle. There, the meat bags would be thawed out, and they could infiltrate the Citadel to rescue Master Peel. The first part of the plan worked well enough. R2-D2 and a squad of 3 reprogrammed battle droids took command of the shuttle, while Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and a small team of clones, including Captain Rex, Commander Cody, and the ARC Troopers 5s and Echo, froze themselves in carbonite for the trip. Unbeknownst to the other Jedi, Ahsoka Tano had herself frozen in carbonite to join the team as well, defying direct orders to stay on Coruscant. After landing, the team attempted to infiltrate the Citadel. They did so, but not without tripping an alarm and alerting Osai Sobek to their presence. Nonetheless, they were able to rescue Evan Peel, as well as Captain Tarkin, who Peel informed his rescuers had half of the Nexus route information. But then, things went sideways. Republic forces suffered heavy casualties in encounters with the Citadel's defense force, and their shuttle was destroyed when R2 came by to extract the team. With no other way off the planet, they were forced to contact the Jedi Council for help. The Council promptly began arranging an extraction while the ground team headed for Lola Sayu's wilderness, hoping to get away from the Citadel. But they were pursued by separatist forces, leading to the death of Evan Peel. He was able to give Ahsoka his share of the Nexus route information before he died, however, so the mission wasn't a failure just yet. For the extraction, the Republic assembled a task force of 4 Vendetta-class Star Destroyers under the command of Admiral Coburn. These came with complements of ARC-170 starfighters and space-capable LAAT gunships, and they were to be escorted by Sacy Tin, Kit Fisto and Adi Gallia, who would fight from the cockpits of their Delta 7B interceptors. Plo Koon, meanwhile, would lead the gunships down to the surface, where they would extract the ground team and make a hasty escape. The Confederacy, of course, had a substantial fleet in orbit already. 1 Providence-class carrier/destroyer, 1 Lucrehulk-class battleship, and 2 Munificent-class star frigates supported by Vulture droids, Tri-fighters, and Hyena bombers. These were commanded by K2B4, as Osai Sobek was busy pursuing the ground team. Sobek was ultimately killed by Ahsoka Tano during a battle at the planned extraction site, leaving command of the naval battle to the tactical droid. The extraction team's plan was simple. The fleet would come out of hyperspace, blitz the defense fleet, and the gunships would take the opportunity to fly out and make the extraction. This proceeded pretty much exactly as planned. With the element of surprise, Admiral Coburn was able to punch a hole in the blockade, which the Jedi widened with a starfighter assault. Plo Koon's gunships poured into the breach, flying down to the surface and successfully extracting what remained of the ground team. But the Republic suffered heavy casualties in the process. Many ARC-170s were lost, and Hyena bombers did considerable damage to several of Admiral Coburn's Star Destroyers. However, Republic forces were able to hold the line long enough for the gunships to fly back through the blockade and dock with Coburn's flagship. Once they were aboard, all Republic forces fled back to Loyalist space. Technically, this means the battle was a separatist victory, but in the grand scheme of things, the opposite was true. Even though Evan Peel was lost and things didn't quite go to plan, some of the prisoners had been rescued, and the Republic now had the coordinates of the Nexus route. By all rights, this should have been a major turning point in the war, but it wasn't. Because while Ahsoka Tano gave her half of the Nexus route coordinates to the Jedi Council, Captain Tarkin gave his half exclusively to Chancellor Palpatine, and presumably, the Council eventually gave Palpatine their half as well. And Palpatine, as we all know, was playing both sides of the war, and he intended to keep it in perfect balance until he deemed the time was right. Ultimately, the Nexus route didn't see any use until the last days of the Clone Wars, and it was never used at all by Republic forces. Palpatine, as Darth Sidious, gave the coordinates the Jedi and clones had fought so hard to keep out of Separatist hands to General Grievous, who used the Nexus route to initiate the Battle of Coruscant. Felucia was the capital of the Commerce Guild and one of the strongholds of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, an important world with extensive control over the nearby Polemian trade route. Naturally, it was a frequent battlefield during the Clone Wars, coming under attack from Republic forces no less than 4 separate times. These battles were notorious for their grueling conditions and the high casualties Republic forces routinely endured, inflicted by local pathogens and wildlife as much as by combat with the enemy. But each of the battles of Felucia had a naval theatre, and we'll be covering all of them today. The Battle of Felucia took place during the first year of the Clone Wars, and it was the Republic's first known assault on the planet. The target, or the specific objectives of this battle, are unknown, but the Republic attacked with a moderately large force led by Jedi Generals Obi-Wan Kenobi, Plo Koon, and Anakin Skywalker, as well as Skywalker's Padawan, Ahsoka Tano. Their fleet was led by Commander Wolffe from the Vendetta-class Star Destroyer, Negotiator, which was accompanied by at least 2 other Star Destroyers of the same class. Plo Koon commanded the Republic's starfighter forces, consisting of V-19 Torrents, BTLB Y-Wings, and LAAT gunships, from the cockpit of his Delta 7B starfighter, the Blade of Dorin, while Kenobi and Skywalker led a sizable ground army backed by Juggernauts and AT-TEs to Felucia's surface. This was an average Republic invasion fleet for this stage of the war, but it was pretty severely outnumbered by Felucia's defenders. Initially, Felucia was protected by a fairly small fleet, which Republic forces were easily able to punch through, allowing the ground force to land on Felucia's surface. But then General Grievous showed up with reinforcements, personally taking command of Felucia's defense force. He deployed vast numbers of additional battle droids and tanks on the ground, and he stationed a moderately large fleet in orbit. Grievous oversaw the battle from the bridge of a Recusant-class light destroyer, which was supported by 9 Munificent-class star frigates and a slew of Vulture droids, Hyena bombers, and even Rogue-class starfighters. Under Grievous's direction, CIS forces at Felucia regrouped and quickly gained the upper hand. In orbit, Grievous's fleet was able to cut Republic naval forces off from the planet's surface, denying Kenobi and Skywalker air support and turning the tide of the ground battle. As the Republic suffered heavy losses on all fronts, the Jedi decided to withdraw. Under the direction of Plo Koon and Commander Wolffe, the remnants of the Republic fleet changed its tactics, focusing on punching a hole in Grievous's blockade so that what remained of the Republic's ground forces could be evacuated. As Kenobi and Skywalker ordered their forces to retreat and prepare for withdrawal, Wolffe ordered the Republic's remaining Star Destroyers to concentrate their fire on a handful of Grievous's cruisers. With the help of Plo Koon's fighter squadrons, several of the cruisers were destroyed, and Republic evacuation gunships were able to make it to the surface despite coming under heavy fire from Vulture droid squadrons. In short order, the Republic evacuated its ground forces from Felucia, albeit with heavy casualties. The Juggernauts were too large to be evacuated by the LAAT carriers able to make it through the blockade, and many AT-TEs also had to be abandoned. Nonetheless, large numbers of Republic personnel, as well as the Jedi on the surface, were evacuated successfully, and once they were safely aboard the Negotiator, the Republic fleet withdrew. The First Battle of Felucia was an unambiguous victory for the CIS. The Republic suffered heavy casualties on all fronts, and though Grievous lost a few ships, it was well worth it. His victory at Felucia all but drove Republic forces out of the sector. Grievous went on to destroy a medical station the Republic had unwisely positioned near Felucia, robbing an entire sector army of its sole Haven-class medical facility. Felucia saw a further 2 battles later in 21 BBY. We know nothing about either battle's naval theatre, but we figured we'd discuss them anyway to provide continuity. The Second Battle of Felucia was a direct follow-up to the first. Plo Koon, Anakin Skywalker, and Ahsoka Tano led detachments of the 104th Battalion and 501st Legion in another attempt to take the planet. Republic ground forces landed in the Felucian wilderness and advanced toward one of the Confederacy's major strongholds on the planet under the cover of night. They had the element of surprise, and Grievous was off-world managing other theaters, having left operations on Felucia under the command of tactical droid TZ-33, giving them more of a chance than they had had in the first battle. This battle initially went well for the Republic. The 104th Battalion was able to take TZ-33's stronghold by storm, and the tactical droid himself was terminated. Republic forces claimed the stronghold for use as a beachhead, and from there, they began a broader campaign to take Felucia. Sooner or later, however, their momentum faltered, and while the initial stage of the Second Battle of Felucia ended in a Republic victory, Republic forces were eventually driven off Felucia once more, leading to a third invasion just a few months later. This third invasion also saw initial success, but by 20 BBY, Felucia was once again a separatist stronghold. It was around that time that the Republic gained the upper hand in the Clone Wars, driving the Confederacy from their scattering of strongholds in the core worlds. Castel, the home of the separatist-aligned Gossams and Commerce Guild Presidente Shu Mei, was one of the planets conquered by the Republic during this period. With Castel's fall, May relocated her operations to Felucia, the site of the Commerce Guild's headquarters, where she established a fortress and a massive droid army. She and her lieutenants took over the defense of Felucia from General Grievous, who had other theaters of the war to manage. By 19 BBY, during the Outer Rim sieges, Shumei's stronghold on Felucia was one of the Republic's highest priority targets, and a final battle, which we're going to call the Siege of Felucia for clarity, began. This was a much larger and longer battle than those that had come before, and it began with a fierce naval battle in which Republic forces broke the Commerce Guild's blockade of the planet. With the blockade broken, the 182nd Legion deployed on Felucia to begin the ground assault, only to be completely wiped out. The 182nd was unprepared for Felucia's environmental challenges, and they struggled to battle the droid army in its chaotic jungles. The final blow came when Shumei ordered the release of starved Acklays into the jungles, which finished off the 182nd. A detachment of the 501st was sent in to determine what had happened to the 182nd after contact was lost, and they were able to establish a Republic beachhead on the planet, despite being ravaged by local flesh-eating diseases and the local predator population. The 501st was eventually relieved by Aayla Secura and the 327th Star Corps, who took command of the ground war on Felucia in the final weeks of the Clone Wars. By that point in the battle, the Confederacy had sent in naval reinforcements, but the Republic had as well. In his 19 BBY State of the Republic address, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine labeled Felucia, together with Megiddo and Saleucami, as part of a triad of evil. 3 separatist strongholds that were the Republic's highest priority targets. Large parts of Coruscant's defense fleet were sent off to participate in those 3 sieges, significantly bolstering Republic naval forces at Felucia. Led by Aayla Secura's flagship, the Venator-class Star Destroyer Intrepid, a large fleet of Venator-class Star Destroyers and Acclamator-class assault ships, bolstered by squadrons of V-Wings, ARC-170s, and LAAT gunships, attempted to seize control of Felucia's orbital theater. They were opposed by a large fleet of Providence-class carrier/destroyers and Munificent-class star frigates, which were supported by hordes of Vulture droids. But the reinforcements from Coruscant proved decisive. By the final days of the Clone Wars, the Separatist fleet above Felucia had been destroyed, and all that remained was the ground battle. With General Secura's leadership and the 327th's skill in fighting in alien environments, the ground battle started to go well for the first time in the Republic's long Felucia campaign. Republic forces on Felucia were well on their way to victory when Secura was executed as part of Order 66. The CIS droid army was deactivated soon afterwards, and Felucia came under Imperial control. Though the Separatist movement itself was generally in the right, the Confederacy of Independent Systems allied with some pretty evil factions, and of its more unsavory allies, none were more vile than the Zygerian slave empire. Long ago, the Zygerians had built an empire for themselves off the slave trade before the Jedi came along and forced them out of business. But the chaos of the Clone Wars gave the Zygerians an opportunity to rebuild and return to enslaving planets, forcing the Jedi to intervene once more. In this video, we'll be telling the tale of the Battle of Kadavo, the conflict in which the Republic broke the back of the resurgent Zygerian Empire. During the Clone Wars, most of the galaxy was divided between Loyalist and Separatist worlds, but a select few remained neutral, either to play both sides or out of a misguided belief in pacifism. The Togruta colony of Kiros fell into the latter category, and their aversion to violence ultimately left them vulnerable when the war finally arrived on their doorstep. In late 21 BBY, a CIS invasion force arrived on Kiros, and the Togrutas, unwilling to fight back, promptly surrendered to them. As the Separatists deployed their battle droids in the Togruta settlements, the entire planet's population was herded into troop ships, ostensibly to be brought somewhere safe and far from the front lines of the Clone Wars. But they were instead taken to Cygeria, the homeworld of one of the Confederacy's newest allies. There, the Togrutas were forced into slavery. The Zygerians prepared to auction them off to the highest bidder, hoping that the people of Kiros would be the first of many to be sold on Zygeria, the foundation of a new Zygerian slave empire. The Confederacy secretly supported this effort as Count Dooku, a secret Sith Lord, believed that the soon-to-be established Galactic Empire would require a base of non-human slaves, as many Sith empires before it had had. He was encouraged in this effort by his master, Darth Sidious, who was thinking along the same lines. Fortunately for the Togrutas, however, Republic forces soon arrived on Kiros to investigate the locals' disappearance, and they quickly retook the colony from the Separatist garrison there. The operation to retake Kiros was commanded by Jedi Generals Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, who discovered that the commander of the Separatist garrison was a Zygerian slaver. After driving off the Separatists and retaking Kiros, the Jedi determined that the Togrutas had likely been taken to Zygeria to be sold into slavery. Skywalker, Kenobi, Ahsoka Tano, and Captain Rex thus embarked on a mission to the slavers' homeworld, hoping to rescue the Togrutas and investigate the Zygerians' resurgence. On Zygeria, the Jedi discovered that the ruler of the Zygerians, Queen Mirage Sintel, was planning a grand slave auction. The team infiltrated the auction, with Skywalker pretending to be a slaver seeking to join Sintel, Ahsoka acting as a slave, and Kenobi and Rex disguising themselves as guards. But the auction was a trap and the team fell right into it. All four were captured and enslaved. Kenobi and Rex were shipped off to be processed with the Togruta, who were being held at a slave processing facility on the planet Kadavo, while Tano was held prisoner at the Zygerian palace, and Sintel claimed Skywalker to be her personal servant. Sintel had apparently taken a liking to Skywalker, and she wasn't put off by his burning hatred of Zygerians and the slave trade. On Kadavo, Kenobi and Rex successfully located the Togrutas from Kiros, but they were powerless to help them, and they were brutalized by the facility's guards, who were commanded by the vicious keeper, Agrus. The Kadavo facility was built for maximum security, suspended over a pool of lava in one of Kadavo's numerous volcanic calderas, and Agrus routinely dropped slaves into the lava to die to punish defiance. He cowed Kenobi's attempts at resistance by killing innocent Togrutas, promising to kill more if the Jedi instigated a rebellion. This wasn't enough for Agrus, however, and after receiving orders from Count Dooku to execute both Republic prisoners, he was eager to comply. Fortunately, Skywalker and Tano were able to escape their bonds on Zygeria, and they learned that the others were being held on Kadavo. They stole a Zygerian slave ship, the Takora, and made for Kadavo as quickly as they could. They also sent a message to the Republic Navy, appraising them of the situation and requesting reinforcements. The message was received by Admiral Coburn and Jedi Master Plo Koon, who quickly rallied a small fleet group and the Wolfpack to join the brewing Battle of Kadavo. The Takora held together for long enough for Skywalker and Tano to make it to the Kadavo facility, but they had only just disembarked when the ship was destroyed by the Zygerians' on-site turbo laser batteries. Undeterred, they began a two-person assault on the facility, cutting down slaver scum without hesitation or remorse. When not even the facility's blast doors were able to slow the Jedi down, Agrus contacted Count Dooku for advice. The Count ordered him to herd the Togruta onto a platform suspended above the caldera and threatened to drop them if Skywalker refused to surrender. Agrus did as ordered, and Kenobi begged Skywalker to relent to prevent more innocent deaths, but instead of surrendering, Skywalker called in his reinforcements. Admiral Coburn arrived with two ships, a Venator-class Star Destroyer, which remained in orbit, and an Architons-class light cruiser, the Hand of Justice, which descended into Kadavo's atmosphere. The Star Destroyer deployed waves of Z-95 headhunters and LAAT gunships, led by Plo Koon from the cockpit of his personal starfighter, the Blade of Dorian. The Zygerians scrambled HH-87 Starhoppers in response, but Plo Koon and his pilots had the advantage of both numbers and skill, and they made short work of the facility's air wing. But the facility's turbo lasers were still functional, and they were a big problem for Plo's fighters. The turbo lasers were protected by deflector shields, which meant the Republic's fighters couldn't do anything about them. As this situation developed, Admiral Coburn and Commander Wolf descended toward the facility aboard the Hand of Justice, but they were unable to get close enough until the turbo lasers were eliminated. Meanwhile, as Skywalker and Tano pushed further into the facility, Kenobi and Rex broke free of their restraints and attacked the guards. Agrus, unwilling to let the Jedi win, gave the order for the slaves to be killed and then destroyed the facility's console, preventing Kenobi from countermanding the order. Kenobi alerted Kun and Skywalker to the situation, and Skywalker set off to destroy the turbo lasers while Ahsoka went to help the slaves. Skywalker killed the operators of one of the turrets and used it to destroy the others, allowing Admiral Coburn to bring the hand of justice close to the facility. Ahsoka advised him to bring the cruiser under the platform where the slaves were being held, allowing them to drop safely onto the hull of the ship. Coburn did as advised, and Commander Wolf led the Wolfpack out to help with the evacuation. Inside the facility, Kenobi and Rex finished off the guards, and Rex took out Keeper Agrus. They and Skywalker were evacuated from the facility aboard an LAAT gunship, while Ahsoka and the Wolfpack successfully got the Togruta to safety aboard the Hand of Justice. Once everyone was evacuated, Plo Koon ordered his gunships to fire on the facility, destroying it and killing all remaining slaver vermin left within. The Battle of Kadavo was a total victory for the Republic, which suffered minimal casualties, losing just one LAAT gunship. The destruction of the Kadavo facility crippled the Zygerian slave empire, which lost its alliance with the Confederacy soon after. The threat of the Zygerians' return was ended, at least for a time. Meanwhile, the people of Kiros were returned to their homeworld. Scarred by the horrors they had been subjected to, they gave up their pacifist codes and vowed to join the Republic. The leader of the Kiros colony, General Roshti, believed it would take some time for his people to recover from the affair, and he authorized the Grand Army of the Republic to train them in self-defense, lest Kiros come under attack again. Even in a galaxy far, far away, few entities hold more power than the banks. This was the case with the Intergalactic Banking Clan, the largest banking entity in the galaxy. They financed many worlds, but when the Clone Wars broke out, they maintained neutrality and played both sides for profit. This could have perhaps been allowed to continue had the powers that be not decided they wanted to influence the banking clan for themselves and would stop at nothing to gain control of it. That brings us to 20 BBY and the Battle of Scipio. A battle that seemed straightforward on paper, but proved to be anything but. But before we get into that fateful battle in 20 BBY, it's important to understand the events that brought all the players to Scipio. For centuries, the IGBC had been one of the most powerful commerce guilds in the galaxy. It was a banking union made up of Munilint's council of banking clans allied with several other banking entities. Operating out of Munilint, the IGBC controlled assets spanning half the galaxy. The best way to imagine its influence would be as a massive entity that could lend money to other entities and through its investments and loans, controlled the flow of wealth in the galaxy. At the time the Separatist crisis broke out, the IGBC was represented by Senator Rush Clovis in the Galactic Senate. We've spoken before about how ludicrous it was for a corporation to have political representation, and this is no different. The IGBC was essentially positioned to put forward fiscal policies that suited its financial endeavors in lending money to the Republic, and it was more than happy to act in its own interest. This was proven even further during the Separatist crisis when the IGBC openly supported the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Its servers hosted Separatist propaganda when their clients accessed the Holonet, it sabotaged meetings with Republic Senator Ax Mo to discuss funding for a Republic military initiative, and supported Chancellor Palpatine in the Senate in exchange for several of their corporations profiting from embezzled funds the Chancellor had squirreled away into secret accounts. During the Clone Wars, the IGBC's support of the CIS only became more blatant. It supplied its security forces for the CIS's droid army, with the IGBC's chairman, San Hill, personally sending his forces to them. The IGBC also stalled the Republic for 8 months when deciding whether the Republic forces would be allowed to be posted in the neutral territories of Argao. At this time, the Republic was aware of the IGBC's involvement with the Separatists, but due to how vital the banking clan was to the Republic economy, they had little choice but to allow them to continue profiting from both sides of the war, at least for a time. Tensions escalated until the Battle of Munilint in 22 BBY, which saw Chairman Hill and his executive associates arrested. Although the Mun government was still in charge of the IGBC, their headquarters were moved from Munilance to Scipio, which was a neutral planet, and, importantly, not under Republic military occupation. Shortly after, in 20 BBY, Senators Clovis and Amidala uncovered corruption within the IGBC that was detrimental to both sides for a change. The Council of Five was arrested for corruption and fraud, creating a need for a new head of the IGBC. Neither the Republic nor the CIS would tolerate a banking clan that ripped them off, essentially, so for once, they agreed. Both parties sent delegations to Scipio to oversee the appointment of a new chairman of the IGBC, Rush Clovis. The Republic sent Senator Padme Amidala accompanied by Clone Commander Thorn and a garrison of his Coruscant Guard, and the CIS sent Senator Beck Lawsey accompanied by several commando droids. The stage was finally set for things to stabilize. Except, it turns out, things didn't stabilize at all. What had seemed like a peaceful diplomatic meeting turned bloody almost immediately. After Rush Clovis's new appointment as head of the IGBC, Count Dooku contacted him in private and demanded he cede control of the banks to the CIS. When Clovis refused, stating the banks would remain unbiased, Dooku threatened to not repay the CIS loans, which would collapse the banks. Faced with bankruptcy, Clovis had no choice but to raise the interest rate on Republic loans, which enraged the Senate. But Dooku wasn't done yet. To implicate Clovis as a separatist as much as possible, he personally commanded a fleet and launched an invasion of Scipio. Dooku's fleet consisted of 3 Munificent-class star frigates, 1 Providence-class carrier/destroyer, and 2 separatist supply ships. His forces included HMP droid gunships, Hyena-class bombers, Vulture droids, and B-1, B-2, and BX series battle droids, all commanded by a super tactical droid. Once Republic forces, led by Commander Thorn, became aware of the separatist fleet, the commander ordered a retreat off the exposed landing zone where they had been stationed. The clones warned Senator Amidala of the incoming attack, but there was little time. Dooku's bombers swooped in and destroyed the LAAT gunships and Consular-class cruiser the Republic forces had brought with them, stranding them on the surface and forcing a retreat into the neutral zone. Even as they retreated, battle droids dropped down and engaged the Republic shock troopers, wiping them out to the last one. With the Republic presence neutralized, Dooku was free to land safely and have his forces occupy Scipio. Senator Amidala was taken captive, though not before she got a message through to Chancellor Palpatine and the Jedi. The breach was so severe and urgent that, upon hearing the news, the Galactic Senate immediately approved a counterattack led by Anakin Skywalker, Captain Rex, and the 501st. The Republic was taking back Scipio and the banking clans. To face off against the fleet Dooku had brought, General Skywalker brought 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers and 2 Architans-class light cruisers. They immediately began firing on the Separatist blockade the moment they exited hyperspace, while Skywalker and a legion of his 501st boarded several LAAT gunships headed planetside with the support of several Z-95 starfighters providing air support. The Separatists deployed several droid fighters to take on the clone starfighters, but as the battle waged on, it became clear the droid forces were outmatched. Dooku, having achieved his objective, ordered a retreat and the Confederate fleet departed, finally allowing the LAATs to reach the ground. As they approached the city, Republic forces encountered the remaining Separatist forces, mostly in the form of droid bombers and starfighters that had been deployed during the Separatists' invasion of Scipio. General Skywalker and his troopers disembarked at the landing pads Thorn and his guards had fallen at and engaged the remaining droid ground forces. Leaving Commander Rex in charge of neutralizing the remaining droids, the Jedi ran off to rescue Senator Amidala. Perhaps predictably, the end for Rush Clovis was both tragic and unfair. He and Senator Amidala had been held captive in his office. Aware that it had been framed, Clovis lamented that his legacy would be nothing but one of treason and corruption. Senator Amidala encouraged his surrender, but when General Skywalker stormed into the office and dispatched the security droids, Clovis saw no choice but to take Amidala hostage. Holding her at gunpoint in an effort to buy himself enough time to plead his innocence, Clovis told Skywalker the whole truth, who refused to believe him. But in the end, it wasn't Skywalker who killed him. A disabled Vulture droid crashed into the spire supporting the office, causing it to collapse. Skywalker held on to both of them as the structure collapsed, but he seemed unable to save them both. To protect Amidala, Clovis let go and plummeted to his death, sacrificing himself for her sake. The droid forces still lingering behind were soon fully dispatched, and Scipio was under Republic control. The aftermath of the battle was momentous and not at all coincidental. With Dooku's mission a success, the IGBC had been clearly implicated once more in fraud and corruption. With the blame laid at Clovis's feet, the Mun government ceded control of the banking clans to Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. Although Palpatine received the honor humbly, this had been his plan all along. With control of the banking clans directly in his hands, Palpatine had more power than ever before. After Order 66, he used that power to nationalize the banking clans and take full control of their assets and influence for the Empire. Even in a galaxy far, far away, money grants power and power leads to corruption. Rush Clovis learnt that the hard way, and with him set up as the sacrificial lamb, Palpatine took control of one of the galaxy's most influential financial entities. Because you're always gonna need credits, even when playing 5D chess. Anaxes was one of the most important worlds in the core, a stronghold of the Republic Navy for tens of thousands of years. It was an extremely hard target, but a tempting one due to its location, history, and role in the Navy. During the Clone Wars, not even this most defended of core worlds was spared the fury of the CIS, and the skies above Anaxes played host to some of the fiercest battles of the war. In this video, we'll be telling the story of those battles and elaborating on what made them so important. Anaxes was located along the coremost leg of the Polemian trade route, just a few stops away from Coruscant, Alderaan, Chandrila, and many other ancient, wealthy core worlds. It was a member of the Republic since its founding, but during the galactic government's early years, it was overshadowed by another planet in its system, Axum, the first world in the system to be settled and one of the wealthiest planets in the galaxy. In the years before the Republic, Axum had been the heart of the Azure Imperium, one of the many pre-Republic human empires, while Anaxes had been its fist. When the Azure Empire became part of the Republic, Axum remained a hub of wealth and power, while Anaxes remained a military outpost, famed for its military shipyards. However, in 24,000 BBY, the Republic changed forever. It began when Republic scouts moving down the Polemian made contact with another major civilization, the lost human colonists of the Tyon cluster. While the Republic was a peaceful alliance at the time with no standing military, the Tyonese had a long history of piracy and conquest, and after having suffered several brutal defeats at the hands of the Hutts in recent millennia, they saw the Republic as an easy target for ripe conquest. Their warships poured down the Polemian trade route, eager to loot the defenseless core. But as world after world on the Polemian fell to the Tyonese, the Republic was preparing a counteroffensive, and it was to begin at Anaxes. As the Tyonese forces advanced, the Anaxes shipyards had been put to work building a new Republic Navy, and as the Tyon Jacks poured into the core worlds, the new ships set out from Anaxes to drive them back. After years of fighting, the Tyonese were driven back. They returned with more fleets, but every subsequent Tyonese offensive was driven off by ships from Anaxes. Over the course of the century-long Tyonese War, Anaxes was the site of many battles, but the Republic won every last one. It was essential in securing eventual Republic victory in the Tyonese War. The Tyonese War changed the Republic forever, and it left a permanent mark on Anaxes. It had become more than the shipyard of the former Azure Imperium. Forever after, Anaxes was the defender of the core, the bulwark of the Republic Navy, and the guardian of Coruscant. Over the course of the next 24,000 years, its prominence only grew. It became home to the Anaxes War College, the Republic Navy's most prestigious institutions, and numerous military families with long and honourable histories. In time, it eventually even came to overshadow Axum. Anaxes kept Coruscant safe in conflict after conflict, maintaining its status as defender of the core in both the old and new Sith Wars. When the Clone Wars began, Anaxes shot back into prestige. Though the New Republic Navy was to be built by Kuat drive yards, Anaxes became its foremost stronghold once again. And it was apparent from the beginning that the defender of the core would be tested yet again. At the start of the war, numerous separatist enclaves formed in the core worlds, breaking the trends set by millennia of previous conflicts. These holdings were small, but some of them were in uncomfortable positions. The Techno-Union-owned shipyards of Forost, for example, were right in Coruscant's backyard. At the start of the war, these small holdings were blockaded. Anaxes became the headquarters of the 1st Sector Army, which patrolled Sector 0, the very heart of the Republic, enforcing these blockades. And for the first year and a half of the war, the separatists in the core were pretty much contained. But that didn't last. In 20 BBY, separatist invasion fleets under the command of General Grievous began an assault on the core worlds named Operation Dirge's Lance. These circumvented Anaxes by attacking from the south, breaking Republic lines at Duro, and rampaging across the southern core. Grievous didn't get any further than Alderaan, but as his campaign entered its later stages, another separatist core campaign was brewing. It began with the breaking of the Forost blockade. The separatists at Forost, it turned out, had been sitting on their hands for the past year and a half. Under the command of Admiral Duaningo, they had been making new Bulwark-class battlecruisers, huge warships with so much armor that they could ram smaller capital ships with impunity. In fact, they did precisely that when they roared out of space dock in 20 BBY, attacking the Republic blockade without warning. Admiral Ningo and his Bulwark fleet trounced the naval forces the Republic had assembled at Forost, and just like that, there was a separatist fleet loose in Sector 0. In response, the Republic called forth the Victory Fleet, a task force of brand new Victory-class Star Destroyers which were rushed into service 6 months early to deal with the crisis. The task force was commanded by two of the Republic's most promising captains, Jan Dodona and Terranald Screed. They battled Admiral Ningo to a draw all across Sector 0, fighting to a draw at Ixtlar, Basilisk, and Alsacan before they managed to corner the wily Sullustan above Anaxes. There, the Bulwark fleet and the Victory fleet tore into each other in high orbit above the planet. The fighting was fierce and the casualties were high. Damage sustained by Screed's flagship caused an explosion on the bridge that scarred the captain for life, forcing him to receive cybernetic enhancements after the battle. But even as Screed was taken out of commission, Dodona saw an opening. He led what was left of the Victory fleet in a final offensive, subjecting Ningo's flagship to sustained fire. The ship was destroyed and the Admiral was vaporized with it. The rest of the Bulwark fleet was destroyed in short order, and Dodona and Screed were hailed as heroes. But this wasn't the only battle of Anaxes to take place during the Clone Wars. Later in the war, separatist forces attacked Anaxes again, this time landing invasion armies on the surface and focusing their efforts on the planet's shipyards. This invasion effort was led by Admiral Trench, who came to Anaxes with a massive fleet, consisting of at least 7 Munificent-class star frigates, 6 DH Omni support vessels, 2 Recusant-class destroyers, and 3 Providence-class carrier/destroyers, including Trench's flagship, the Invulnerable. This fleet was supported by Vulture droids, Hyena bombers, HMP gunships, and a massive ground army. While Mace Windu took command of Republic ground forces, Anakin Skywalker was put in charge of the naval battle, presumably alongside a number of Republic naval officers. The Republic Defense Fleet consisted of at least 7 Venator-class Star Destroyers, 7 Architons-class light cruisers, and 3 Consular-class cruisers, supported by Z-95 Headhunters, ARC-170s, BTLB Y-Wing bombers, ETA-2 light interceptors, and LAAT gunships. The naval battle was fierce, and casualties were heavy. Republic forces fought hard, but Trench quickly attained the upper hand and kept it. At every turn, his forces outmaneuvered the Republic's, in space as well as on the ground. Republic naval forces suffered heavy casualties, with at least 2 Star Destroyers and 1 cruiser confirmed destroyed. Things were starting to look grim when Republic Command discovered how Trench had managed to maintain such an advantage. He was using an algorithm developed by Captain Rex, Fives, and Echo of the 501st Legion, which the Separatists had access to through Echo, who was a prisoner of the Techno Union on Skako Minor. With the help of the Bad Batch, however, Skywalker was able to rescue Echo from his captors, taking away Trench's ace in the hole. They devised a plan to use Echo to lure Trench into a trap at Anaxes' main shipyards, which involved Echo, Skywalker, and the Bad Batch boarding the Invulnerable to make it look like Echo's transmissions were coming from Skako Minor. The plan worked, and most of Trench's ground army was remotely deactivated by Echo using the Invulnerable's command systems, all but thwarting the invasion. Trench, however, wasn't finished. He activated a bomb he had ordered to be placed in the lower levels of the shipyards, which threatened to destroy most of Anaxes if it detonated. Echo tried to transmit the deactivation codes to General Windu, but Trench was able to narrow down where he was broadcasting from and take him out of commission. But then, Skywalker took matters into his own hands. He stormed up to the bridge and forced Trench to give up the codes before killing the Admiral and rigging the Invulnerable's reactor to detonate. As Republic forces on Anaxes' surface drove off what remained of the Separatist force, Skywalker and the Bad Batch fled the Invulnerable, remotely detonating its reactor once they had passed a safe distance. The resultant explosion destroyed a sizable chunk of the Separatist fleet, the remainder of which was driven off in short order. So that's the story of the Battle of Anaxes. The first one is from Legends and the second from canon, but since they're clearly meant to be 2 distinct battles, we decided to discuss them both. We've spoken about many worlds and many battles on this channel before in our quest to document the many conflicts that made up the Clone Wars. In today's video, we'll be taking a close look at the numerous incidents and battles that took place on Cato Neimoidia, a Purse world of the Trade Federation. During the Clone Wars, both sides did their best to maintain control of the planet, leading to a series of escalating conflicts. As far as planets went, Cato Neimoidia wasn't anything special. Located in the Cato Neimoidia system in the colonies region, it was a largely aquatic world. Solid land was found in the form of massive rock pillars that extended out of the seas, where grasslands and forests thrived. Bridges built between these pillars housed Cato Neimoidia's bridge cities, where the local Neimoidians lived. But the planet itself wasn't anything particularly special. Sure, it was famous for its opera, but no matter how much of a musicophile they might be, we'd like to believe no one would wage war over art. Cato Neimoidia's importance lay less in its astrogeography and more in its political role. You see, Cato Neimoidia had long been a prominent holding of the Trade Federation, a massive megacorporation that had been growing in power for centuries. Before the Separatist crisis, the Trade Federation was so influential that it had its own seat in the Senate, where it no doubt pushed for policies that suited its commercial activities. Cato Neimoidia was also by far the wealthiest of the Neimoidian purse worlds, with its bridge cities housing massive treasure vaults owned by powerful Trade Federation executives, including Viceroy Newt Gunray, who lived on the planet. As seen in their conflict with Naboo, the Trade Federation was so powerful that they had the influence to force planets into exclusive contracts and even blockade them. As they expanded their network, however, they found themselves ever more at odds with Republic regulations. When the Separatist crisis broke out, it was the perfect opportunity for the Trade Federation to free itself of restrictive Republic legislation and do business in even scummier ways. Officially, however, they maintained strict neutrality. Newt Gunray, a key figure in the Separatist military, was denounced as an extremist, and the Trade Federation proclaimed they, and by extension all their territories, remained officially neutral. This was purely formality, of course. The Trade Federation kept Newt Gunray as their leader, and was in practice the single largest funder of the CIS droid army, and Neimoidia and the Purse worlds were considered Separatist territory by the Republic military. Still, Cato Neimoidia kept up appearances, and even as Neimoidia itself began seeding the space between it and Kuat with hyperspace mines to screw with Republic fleets, Cato and Neimoidia acted as neutral as it could. As you might expect though, that would change over the course of the war. That said, the Republic's first mission to Cato and Neimoidia wasn't a military one, but one of diplomacy, even if it didn't go as smoothly as they would have liked. A few months into the Clone Wars, a bombing on Zara, Cato and Neimoidia's capital city, resulted in significant infrastructure damage and scores of dead. With the planet's neutrality threatened, both factions sent emissaries to investigate the bombing. The Republic sent Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the Confederacy of Independent Systems sent Asajj Ventress. When the two emissaries arrived in the city, they were greeted by Minister Alov Iam. Both parties were extremely cautious about each other, attempting to glean whatever information they could about each other while investigating the bombing. Evidence pointed toward an intentional attack. Unfortunately, we don't have many details about what precisely transpired. Sources refer to it as messy business or the incident, and all we know is that Kenobi was surrounded in the Grand Theatre of Judgment by Neimoidian guards and had to be rescued by his former Padawan, Anakin Skywalker. In the aftermath of the incident, Cato and Neimoidia was unable to remain neutral. The planet fell under overt separatist control, and over the next few years, there would be many more battles on the planet. In the final year of the Clone Wars, the CIS deployed military forces to the planet in what came to be known as the invasion of Cato and Neimoidia. As part of their attack force, the CIS had deployed a Providence-class dreadnought and 6 Munificent-class star frigates, as well as countless scores of tri-fighters and Vulture-class droid starfighters. This prompted a military response from the Republic, which sent Jedi General Anakin Skywalker, his Padawan Ahsoka Tano, and the GAR's 501st Legion. Alongside the 2 Jedi and clone troopers, the Republic forces were composed of 2 Actis-class light interceptors, 1 Consular-class cruiser, and 3 Venator-class star destroyers, one of which was Skywalker's personal flagship. Clone forces were also supported by 6 LAATs and Z-95 headhunters. When Republic forces exited hyperspace and prepared to assault the Separatist blockade, droid tri-fighters were deployed from the Providence-class dreadnought, causing serious damage to the Republic fleet. The 2 Jedi and their forces were nevertheless able to break the blockade and lead a squadron of Z-95s down to the surface, followed by the squadron of LAAT gunships, which were carrying Captain Rex and a unit of clone jetpack troopers. A dogfight broke out in the atmosphere as sabotage droids assaulted their craft, successfully taking out Skywalker's light interceptor and causing him to lose consciousness. Thanks to his Padawan and astromech droid, R2-D2, he was saved. Soon after he recovered, however, he and Tano were recalled to Coruscant to deal with the terrorist attack on the Jedi Temple. Although initially the battle had been going in the Republic's favor, it terminated in an eventual Separatist victory. It's unknown whether or not the Jedi's departure was the catalyst of the Republic's defeat, but the result was that the planet fell once more under Separatist control. After the Separatists took control of Cato and Neimoidia, they held the planet until 19 BBY, when the Republic tried to take the planet a second time. Following the Separatist victories in the core worlds during Operation Dirge's Lance in 20 BBY, the Republic launched a string of counterattacks which not only reclaimed many lost Loyalist core worlds, but saw Republic forces besiege the CIS's strongholds in the core. While the Outer Rim sieges raged elsewhere, this campaign saw widespread success, and by 19 BBY, the only pockets of resistance that remained were the Neimoidian Purse worlds, Cato and Neimoidia among them. Many of the Separatist core worlds lost were the headquarters of the Separatist Council factions, and in response, General Grievous had ordered all the members of the Separatist Council to abandon their strongholds and retreat to a rendezvous point in the Outer Rim territories. Newt Gunray, however, retreated to his homeworld of Cato and Neimoidia with a fleet of Federation warships, where he intended to loot his own stronghold before it fell to the Republic. A task force led by Jedi Generals Kenobi and Skywalker were dispatched to the planet. 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers commanded by Jan Dodona took on the Trade Federation warships Gunray had brought with him in the planet's upper atmosphere, while the Jedi, accompanied by a legion of clone troopers, led an assault on Gunray's stronghold. With Dodona providing air support and an initial aerial bombardment, the clones attacked the stronghold from the peninsula's northern shores, assaulting the Citadel's energy shields. Meanwhile, the Jedi led a smaller force through an orchard, infiltrating the fungus farms under the Citadel. Carefully, they made their way up to the upper floors, then locked in on Gunray and his elites, pursuing them as they attempted to reach their shuttle. Despite several complications, including, but not limited to, Kenobi getting high off magic spores, the Republic managed to take the planet. Although Gunray was ultimately able to escape, Cato Neimoidia fell under Republic control once more. This wasn't the end of the conflict on Cato Neimoidia, however. Separatist holdouts remained in the planet's bridge cities, and in the final days of the Clone Wars, additional Republic forces were dispatched to mop them up. As part of the campaign, Jedi General Plo Koon was sent alongside the GAR's 442nd Siege Battalion to complete the conquest of Cato Neimoidia, as the surrender of the Trade Federation holdouts was considered pivotal in ending the war. With him, Plo Koon brought 2 Venator-class Star Destroyers and many ARC 170 starfighters, AR-RTs, and infantry support platforms. On the Confederacy side, the Separatists fielded 3 Providence-class dreadnoughts and many droid tri-fighters. Both sides engage in a series of aerial conflicts both in orbit and within the planetary atmosphere. The details are unclear, but we know the battle was decided in favor of the Republic, who eventually recaptured the planet thanks to Plo Koon and the 442nd's efforts. However, the Republic victory was short-lived. Not long after their triumph, Order 66 was enacted. Captain Jag of the 442nd received the order to terminate the traitorous Jedi, and following the Chancellor's orders, he executed Plo Koon. Throughout the war, Cato Neimoidia changed hands more often than a dollar in his Ultronian club. In the end, we'd go as far to say that no side really won. The only one who came out on top was Palpatine, but then again, that was sort of the entire point of the Clone Wars. Star Wars involves a great many space battles, but perhaps the largest of them was the Battle of Coruscant, the backdrop of the first acts of Revenge of the Sith. This climactic battle was the largest and most important of the Clone Wars, as well as one of the war's most chaotic battles. All of you are surely familiar with it, but there's much more to the battle than appears in the film. In this video, we're going to be specifically focusing on the naval theater, as we've discussed the ground battle in the past, unraveling one of the most chaotic space battles in the galaxy's history. Before we get into things, we'd like to share a quote from the opening of the Revenge of the Sith novelization. "The skies of Coruscant blaze with war. The artificial daylight spread by the capital's orbital mirrors is sliced by intersecting flames of ion drives and punctuated by starburst explosions. Contrails of debris raining into the atmosphere become tangled ribbons of cloud. The nightside sky is an infinite lattice of shining hairlines that interlock planetoids and track erratic spirals of glowing gnats. Beings watching from rooftops of Coruscant's endless cityscape can find it beautiful. From the inside, it's different. The gnats are drive glows of starfighters. The shining hairlines are light scatter from turbolaser bolts powerful enough to vaporize a small town. The planetoids are capital ships. The battle from the inside is a storm of confusion and panic, of galvan particle beams flashing past your starfighter so close that your cockpit rings like a broken annunciator, or the boot-sole shock of concussion missiles that blast into your cruiser, killing beings that you've trained with and eaten with and played and laughed and bickered with. From the inside, the battle is desperation and terror and the stomach-churning certainty that the whole galaxy is trying to kill you. Across the remnants of the Republic, stunned beings watch in horror as the battle unfolds live on the holonet. Everyone knows the war has been going badly. Everyone knows that more Jedi are killed or captured every day, that the Grand Army of the Republic has been pushed out of system after system, but this, a strike at the very heart of the Republic, an invasion of Coruscant itself, how can this happen? We'll begin by answering that question. How did the Clone Wars get to this point? By 19 BBY, the Clone Wars had been raging for 3 years, and contrary to popular perception, the Republic was actually winning. It was 6 months into the Outer Rim sieges, in which the Republic had driven the CIS back into 6 pockets of territory scattered across the Rim.
reclaiming swaths of Separatist space closer to the core. The campaign was long and grueling, but the Jedi had been led to believe that it would mean the end of the war. But they were deceived. The Outer Rim sieges were just a diversion, a trap meant to bog the Jedi down while the Sith commenced their final operation, an invasion of Coruscant itself. Darth Sidious, in his day-to-day guise as Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, sent large chunks of Coruscant's defense fleet to join sieges on Megiddo, Felucia, and Saleucami. As Darth Sidious, he then gave General Grievous the coordinates of the Nexus route, a secret hyperspace route through the deep core, which gave the Separatists a clear shot at the Republic capital. Grievous committed hard to the operation. He stripped an entire theatre of naval assets, building a fleet that represented a sixth of the entire CIS Navy, which was mustered at Yagdul. Led by Grievous and Captain Lashros Dauphin from Grievous's flagship, the Invisible Hand, the fleet consisted of over 1,000 Munificent-class star frigates, over 1,000 Recusant-class light destroyers and Providence-class carrier/destroyers, and dozens of Lucrehulk-class battleships and droid control ships. Notable ships included the destroyers Prosperous, Vanguard Flare, and Patriot First, and the heavy cruiser Tide of Progress 7. This enormous fleet came backed by enormous swarms of Vulture droids and Tri-Fighters, as well as the invasion army to end all invasion armies, composed of hundreds of millions of battle droids. Of course, even with much of the Coruscant home fleet off in the Outer Rim, Coruscant was scarcely undefended. It was still protected by hundreds of Carrack-class light cruisers, Dreadnought-class heavy cruisers, Victory-class star destroyers, and thousands of Vendetta-class star destroyers, with notable ships including the light cruisers Indomitable, Mas Ramadar, and the star destroyers Impavid and Gualara. These were supported by large wings of ARC 170s, ETA-2 interceptors, and V-wings, as well as large ground forces on the surface. Grievous was able to jump his fleet right on top of the Coruscant home fleet, catching them unprepared and with their shields down. A large portion of the fleet was destroyed outright in minutes, but over 1,000 star destroyers remained operational and a chaotic naval battle began. Early on, Grievous made it a priority to delay the arrival of Republic reinforcements. One of Grievous's ships hosted a powerful jamming device that was able to block all communications to and from Coruscant, while other ships seeded mass shadow mines at the outlets of all major hyperspace routes into the Coruscant system. Once this was done, Grievous ordered his ships to spread out and begin attacking targets of opportunity, while his ground armies deployed and did the same on the surface. Separatist warships began blowing up communication satellites, orbital mirrors, and random surface locations, while on the planet below, millions of Vulture droids poured through the clouds, deliberately flying into buildings, commuter rail lines, and other civilian targets. The battle lasted for a week, and there was no rhyme or reason to it. With communications jammed, the Republic fleet was scattered as well, and before long, ships on both sides just began shooting at whatever was closest. The chaos was mirrored on the ground. The first breakthrough came when Republic forces were able to break the Confederacy's comms that were jamming and return communications to normal, allowing word of the attack to spread beyond Coruscant. Republic Navy fleet groups rushed back to the capital, arriving in scattered groups and forcing Grievous's fleet into Coruscant's upper atmosphere. For days, the attack seemed to be totally disorganized, a desperate last act of revenge against the Republic. But the Jedi realized, much too late, that the whole thing was yet another diversion. Grievous used the chaos as cover to kidnap Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, spiriting him away to the Invisible Hand. The Jedi Council's initial rescue attempts failed, and they ultimately decided to call in two of the Order's greatest heroes, Kenobi and Skywalker. To again quote the Revenge of the Sith novelization, "Beings across the galaxy watch and shudder and pray that they might wake up from this awful dream, because they know what they're watching, live on the holonet, is the death of the Republic. Many of these beings break into tears. Many more reach out to comfort their husbands or wives, their creche mates or kintriads, and their younglings of all descriptions, from children's to cubs
to spawn fry. But here's a strange thing. Few of the younglings need comfort. It is instead the younglings who offer comfort to their elders. Across the Republic, in words or pheromones, in magnetic pulses, tentacle braids, or mental telepathy, the message from the younglings is the same. Don't worry, it'll be alright. Anakin and Obi-Wan will be there any minute. They say this as though these names can conjure miracles. These adults can take no comfort from their younglings. Palpatine is captured, Grievous will escape, the Republic will fall. No mere human beings can turn this tide. No mere human beings would even try, not even Kenobi and Skywalker. And so it is that these adults across the galaxy watch the holonet with ashes where their hearts should be. Ashes because they can't see two prismatic bursts of real space reversion far out beyond the planet's gravity well, because they can't see a pair of starfighters crisply jettison hyperdrive rings and streak into the storm of separatist vulture fighters with all guns blazing. A pair of starfighters, Jedi starfighters, only two. 2 is enough. 2 is enough because the adults are wrong and their younglings are right. Though this is the end of the age of heroes, it has saved its best for last. The two Jedi returned to Coruscant with the Open Circle Armada led by the Star Destroyer Roti Mundi. As they did, the Republic fleet suddenly received additional reinforcements, a huge fleet of brand new Star Destroyers, some of never-before-seen designs which the Supreme Chancellor had commissioned in secret. The new arrivals cornered Grievous's fleet, preventing them from escaping with their hostage. From here, the battle turned against the Confederacy. After a straight week of fighting without reinforcements, losses were beginning to mount. Many Separatist warships were destroyed, and many more were on the verge of burning out their turbolasers, including the Invisible Hand. And, before long, Kenobi and Skywalker, with the help of Flight Squad 7, were able to board the Invisible Hand and rescue the Supreme Chancellor, with Skywalker killing Count Dooku himself during the rescue attempt. Not long after this, the Invisible Hand suffered extensive damage in a battle with the Star Destroyer Gualara, and it slowly began to break apart. Grievous ultimately chose to abandon ship, fleeing to a nearby battleship and ordering what was left of his fleet to withdraw, leaving Palpatine and the Jedi aboard his crumbling flagship as it fell into Coruscant's gravity well. But against all odds, Anakin Skywalker was able to land the wreck of the Invisible Hand safely, and the Supreme Chancellor was saved. The Battle of Coruscant ultimately ended in a Republic victory, if one that left billions dead and much of Galactic City in ruins. The CIS, meanwhile, never recovered from the losses it suffered at Coruscant. Just a few days later, it would lose the Clone Wars entirely.